You're listening to Sarah Talk. It's political.
This rhetoric about make America great again. Tell me when America was great, and we'll go back there. I'm going with you.
Critical.
Hang on, let me gonna change some words here. All right, ready? Adults with religious confusion who truly believe in a higher power that created us and actually cares what we do with our penises and vaginas should be treated with care, compassion, and kindness, but must not be officially affirmed in their confusion, no matter how sincerely held. Fuck you.
And positively LGBT positive.
In many states, you can still be evicted from housing simply for being gay or transgender. Stand and fight with us.
Oh, and occasionally, completely absurd.
I don't know if you've ever seen a lightning bug, but he flies around with a flame of light coming out of his behind. The lightning bug got a flame coming out of his butt.
It's a beautiful night tonight. All the sodomites are out.
And now, from Orlando, Florida, your host, Sarah Austin.
Hey everybody, Sarah Austin here. I am in the palatial SarahTalk studios in Orlando, Florida. Now, I'm freezing, by the way. Those of you who've been listening long enough will know that I moved down here from Illinois to escape the cold. And we are looking at a forecast next week of a hard freeze with possible fucking snow in Central Florida. So, I am all bundled up, ready for the cold. You may also notice that I'm super sick today, so that lends itself to a deeper, more a radio-esque voice. And for a trans woman, that's really kind of shitty. I kind of hate that a lot. But everybody in my house has the plague. You know, the influenza strain that's going around. They're saying that the vaccine that we all got did not seem to do as much good in Australia during their winter season. So they're expecting it not to be as effective for us this year. And so everyone in my house is sick, all the way from the 2-year-old all the way up to me. So that's been a lot of fun, too. And it's cold outside. Did I mention it's cold outside? F this weather. I moved to Florida for a reason. I'm recording this piece on December 31st, 2017. I have to work tonight. So today's show is going to be sort of a clip show, best of reel. And we put this up to the listeners. The listeners chose the segments that we're going to include on this episode today. And I really was going to try to trim it down to as close to an hour as I could. But as I was listening back to the episodes, there's just nowhere to cut it, really, that doesn't take away from the narrative, that doesn't take away from the story, that doesn't dilute the core message I felt. So we will present these in their entirety. There are 4 of them. But before we get into those, I want to reflect a little bit on the past year. You guys have been so good to us. We've increased our listenership quite a bit. We've increased our patronage, which is always a wonderful thing. That has allowed us to get out of the studio and go do some really great things in the community. And those are probably some of the most proud moments of my 2017 on the show. You know, we went to Polk Pride. We went to Orlando United Day on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. We went to Orlando Pride. And we took part in Transgender Day of Remembrance. And we're looking ahead to 2018. We're looking at doing basically we're going to try to replicate what we've done this year. And if we can add, one more event, then that would be awesome. The more we can do, the better. But man, when you look back at the past year in politics, it just seems like our government was, I don't even know what to say. Our government. Democracy. Kofifi. But personally, I think, we've had some pretty good successes for the year. And so I'm going to dwell on that and hope like hell that 2018 can't possibly get any worse. All right. Enough rambling. Let's get into our 2017 look back at some of our favorite interviews as voted on by our listeners. we'll be presenting these in order of appearance. First up is Jake Vahaba, who is a great personal friend of mine, and he and I worked together at Disney back in the day when we both worked for Disney in the same location. And he talks about an experience where he suffered a great personal loss and talks about how he is overcoming those feelings, finding new hope for tomorrow while still respecting and honoring the life lost.
Jake and I have an unusual history together. We worked together at Disney in the water parks.
Sure.
And we really hit it off and clicked right away. Like, we were very kind of similar minded people and interested in a lot of the same things. And so that was really cool that, that we kind of hit it off, and that's especially at Disney with the way the schedules work, and your friends really are the people you work with, And so I always talk about how I transferred around so much, and when you move from one place to the next, like you lose touch with people, and there are so many people from my Main Street days that I don't keep in touch with, and there's people from the water park days that I went on to resorts and got into management, and I don't work with them anymore, so I don't hang out with them anymore, so we don't keep in contact regularly, and it sucks, but that's just kind of the way it is. So I love that you've been able to keep in touch and come in and do this thing. The conversation we're about to have, if you are a queasy listener who needs a disclaimer, we're going to talk about some pretty hard stuff coming up in this episode. We're going to talk about, in the second half of this episode, we're going to talk about kind of loss and love and recovering from that, and just be aware that it's an emotional topic. Jake and I worked together at one of the water parks. Was this Gay Days weekend?
It was. It was the night of the Let's Go Play event, which for those of you listening who don't know what that is, it's a special event. I don't know who it's hosted by, but it's hosted at Disney's Typhoon Lagoon Water Park.
Right.
It's essentially an LGBT positive event that takes place at that water park one night every year, and it's an insane party.
It is. You have to have people come in the morning early to clean up, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
Like, there are people patrolling
there,
the cave.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, it's also just lots of alcohol, so you got to make sure people are being safe in the environment. It's insane, just the way you have to set up taxis out front to make sure people are getting home safely. Yeah. It really is... it's a hell of an event. Right.
And we kind of enjoy stuff like that because it's very different from what we normally do on like the normal day-to-day operation of the place. So that particular day, you and I were working together in parking, right? We were doing parking. Was that the night that they shot the fireworks off without telling us, and I had to go racing through the parking lot?
No,
that was
that was the college program.
Oh, that's right.
Night where they shot them off and. Well,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so that was a different thing. My memory is my memory.
But yeah, it was parking. I came in at like probably 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And I was there till 3 in the morning.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It was one of those, because the event runs long, and then you got to make sure everything's buttoned up before you leave. And
yep. And so it was a long, late night.
Sure was.
And so the event ends, and we stuck close together all night long and did what we do at work and had a good time, and and it was fun. But then you left work and you drove home.
Yes.
And then what happens from there?
So I had a long commute. At the time, I was living out by the University of Central Florida, out by that area. So it took me about an hour to get home. And so I get home, and it's sometime after 4 a.m. My voice is going to shake a little bit during this, so if you hear that, it's just going to come with the territory. Probably like 4:30 a.m. Got home. Was living with Leanna, my girlfriend at the time, and got home, and she wasn't home. She wasn't in the bed, and so she doesn't really do sleepovers at friends' house or anything like that. She's not a party animal at all, so. Didn't really know where she was. Had texted her. Hadn't heard anything back. Checked with friends who were mutual friends of mine. Maybe she was over there watching a late movie or something, you know. And couldn't figure out where she was at. So for all intents and purposes, I came home to a missing person.
Right. Yeah. And the vehicle wasn't there, and no sign that she had been home.
No car keys, none of that. Everything was just as I had left it, because she had worked earlier that morning. Right. And I had slept in because she had a regular 8 a.m. shift, and I was going to start at 5:30. So we weren't even going to see each other when we were coming. So she would be driving home, I would be driving to work, as you know, because that's a long commute. So we'd be missing each other. So everything was just as I had left it, to my eye, when I had left for work that day.
And what the hell do you do? You've called people they don't know. Nobody knows.
You start freaking out. You get this knot in your stomach, and you start. It's sort of fascinating how your brain tries to.
You're trying to process it, right?
Yeah. Well, you don't know what to process yet. Right. That's the thing, is you're going into. It's crazy how well your brain works in a situation like that, because I remember not running around screaming, "Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" I was going through a situation like, okay, what's the probability that this is the case? Right. This is the case. This is the case. And so I remember calling one of my friends to say, "Hey, is she with you? Because she's not with me." No. Okay. And then immediately thinking, all right, what did I know she was doing that day? I know she had the next day was supposed to be her first day as a Disney trainer. And so I'm like, okay, she needed to get a parking costume because she was training parking. She was tickets trained. She didn't really work parking a whole lot. She was trained, but didn't work a whole lot. And so I was thinking, okay, she needs to get a parking costume. Who has those? Where would she go? Probably this location. Mm-hmm. And so I called another one of my friends. I said, hey, listen, because he was at college program housing at this point. I was like, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you just, I know, and he was working that event as well, my buddy. And so he had just laid down to go to bed. And I said, listen, I don't know where she's at. Can you just check the parking lot to see if her car is still there? And maybe something happened. The car broke down, phone died, you know, because this is a few years ago, you know, the phones or whatever. And so he checked on that. And immediately your head starts to go through this list of things. Okay, probably, you know, based on probability, what's the situation? Right. And it's sort of interesting how, as much as you're shaking and you have this pit in your stomach, how logical your brain
Well, you're following a timeline. You've gone back to, okay, did she leave work? The vehicle's not there. Yes. Right. Next. Right. And so somewhere between leaving work and not getting home, there has to have been something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And so I remember at some point you have to reach out to her parents to say, listen, have you heard anything? Right. Because I haven't heard anything. And then
they live here or
North Florida, so North about Florida. 3 hours north of Jacksonville, and so I remember saying, you know, listen, is there a way you can, you know, I don't want to freak you out, but is there any way we can look at like her credit card statements to see if, you know, maybe the card's been used somewhere, or, you know, if God forbid, you know, she was, you know, taken somewhere and, you know, they're used for money or what, you know, it's just the weird things that you're trying to go through the probability of what's going on in your head. And I remember that being, the thing that I thought had happened was, okay, she was taken somewhere, like kidnapped or carjacked or something like that, you know? Right. I thought it was like a carjacking because the car was missing. And so I remember for about an hour, like in my head, like what I thought would happen, like, okay, probably that's what's going on is, you know, there's some sort of carjacking somewhere. Right. And, you know, maybe she was pulled into a gas station and, you know. Yeah. So.
And so then at what point did you find out and how, I guess, that wasn't the case?
So the two friends that I had called that day both lived out by CP housing. And at a certain point, they got back to me, you know, she's not here, and the other friend not parked anywhere, her vehicle wasn't laying around anywhere. And that's when they realized how, like, shit, we got someone missing, you know? And so they drove out to me just to be in one space, right? To, you know, coordinate
set up
whatever
the command center, right?
Essentially, yeah. And so I started calling jails. I started calling hospitals, things like that. I called Florida Highway Patrol, who, of course, legally can't tell. We were boyfriend, girlfriend. They're not going to really, even if something had happened, they're not going to release anything to me.
Right.
Because they legally can't do that. And so as frustrating as it was, I looking back on it, I get it. I know you can't do that. So I called the Orange County sheriff, filed a missing persons report. In that case, they send someone out to your residence because they want to talk to you in person and that whole thing.
Right.
And so I don't even know what time in the morning this is. This is where it all gets kind of blurry.
I
remember getting home at 4:30, and then I didn't sleep for 36 hours after that.
Right.
And so my two friends are there with me. We're trying to go through. They're on the phones with hospitals. I'm on the phones with hospitals and things like that. An Orange County officer is being sent to my apartment. And en route, one of the two friends who hadn't arrived yet, he called me, and he's not a very emotional guy, super sweet, but he's sort of guarded in that way.
Right.
And he called me, and his voice was cracking and shaking. And he said, "Hey, I was just looking online at an online Orlando news article, and there was a really bad car accident, and it looks like it might be her car. I can't tell." And so that's when my brain flipped over to, oh shit, maybe it was a car accident. And I don't know why that hadn't clicked in my head yet, but that was the first moment that thing, first time it had occurred in my head.
Right.
Like, oh, I hadn't even thought. I've been thinking about all this ridiculous crap. Arrested.
Right.
The most straight and narrow person ever.
Right.
Right? She was 22 before she had a hard cider, for Christ's sake. So, it's... Yeah. And so, she was a big nature lover. And so that the party scene was not her scene. And so I'm like... So looking back, it's like, why would she be arrested ever for anything?
Yeah.
And so... I could hear in his voice that he was being guarded with, like, I don't know if it was her car, but in his, I could hear he was convinced enough that that's what the case was.
Right.
Because I could just hear it. I've never heard his voice like that ever. And so they both arrive. Orange County comes, and everyone's at the apartment. Orange County gets there and say, hey, we're looking, was someone requesting to file a missing persons report? And I said, well, yeah, but my friend, saw this article on West 2 or whatever it was.
And we think that might be...
And I don't know if that's her or not. The vehicle's upside down. It had been on fire. And so the vehicle was dark green to begin with. It was jet black. There's no color. I can't make out a license plate or anything. It's on its roof, smashed up. It looked like a Hummer, like one of the H2 Hummers. Honestly, from the back, the way it had been filmed and sort of crunched, I couldn't tell. So I'm thinking, I don't know that that's what that is.
Now, at this point, by the act of filing the missing persons report, does that change the legality of whether they can talk to you about it or not? Or still because you're not
No, they wouldn't
related?
Talk to me. No.
Wow.
So, so I tell them, hey, this is what my friend thinks may have happened. I'm not sure. Is there any way we can check? And she's like, we can look into, all this. Here's some stuff to fill out. And it was the officer going into her car, then back out in the apartment to ask a question. At this point, I'm just kind of sitting on my couch, just staring. Not really. That was the first time where someone else, like a police officer, and my friends had been there to sort of take charge of whatever was going on. And so that was the first moment I could take a step back and realize, like, the gravity of, like, oh, like, shit. you know, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where it's a lot of question marks. Nothing's confirmed or anything yet, but not knowing is what sucks the most.
Right.
And the officer just kept, she would come in, ask one question to clarify something, go back out to her car, come back in. Can I use your Wi-Fi? I'm not getting much signal. Absolutely. Do this. Go back to her car. And then there was a period of, I don't know, maybe half an hour-ish where she hadn't come back in. and there was a knock on the door, and it was her and another officer. And so they were very sort of quiet, and they informed me that she was in a car accident and that she had passed away in that car accident. And they were very calm, and their voices were low, very sympathetic, because they knew what they were telling somebody. I can't imagine how difficult that is as your job.
No.
And I remember just your brain sort of shuts off, and you say, okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You know, you shake their hands. It's like, I'm very sorry. It's like, no, I thank you for telling me, because they're not legally obligated to tell me anything. Out of the courtesy of the kindness of their hearts, they told me.
Right.
You know, because they were authorized to release that to her family,
Right.
who are on the way from North Florida, and that's not something you're going to tell them while they're driving.
Right.
Absolutely not. I think I had mentioned before I got the confirmation that she had died in the car accident. I think I had mentioned to them, you know, hey, I think David saw an article of a car accident, and it didn't look very good. And I remember her mom saying, like, again, being very level-headed, it's like, are you telling me someone died in the car accident? I said, yeah. She said, okay, thank you. Because at that point, you're just trying to piece together what you know.
Right.
And then trying to make a cohesive timeline and a story out of what possibly may happen.
Right.
Like, it's really insane how your brain is able to work like that under that kind of duress. It's really interesting. And so after I got, the police officers told me, the sheriff told me, shook their hand and said, all right, thank you very much. I remember sitting back down on the couch, and as soon as I sat on the couch, everything like slow motion.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, like, that was the first time my brain was like, all right, we know what happened. Shut off. You know? And so I just remember just looking at the ground. I was like, I don't know what to do. 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 And that's all I could say. And her parents got there, and we, you know, they saw me, and that's how they knew.
Yeah.
I didn't need to tell them anything.
Right.
Her mom, her younger sister, Leanna's younger sister, and who lives here in Orlando now, and her father walked in. They saw me sitting on the couch, and they didn't, you know, know. Yeah. And so, and so her mom and sister came, and we hugged it out, and that was the breakdown point. That was it. I don't think I was crying yet. I think I was still in complete shock. And her dad just walked outside. I mean, he came over. He like kind of like patted me on both knees, like,
yep.
And like, I'm here. I get it. It sucks. And then he walked right. He didn't say anything. He just walked right out. And I guess he had pulled my friend David outside. Someone who could objectively say, all right, what happened? Tell me what happened.
Right.
And that was sort of how everything transpired that evening. And I just remember I remember texting Paulette, a coworker, saying, hey, you know, I think there's been a car accident. I don't think I'm going to come into work today. Again, your brain is so level-headed, and that's like, oh, I should let them know I'm not coming in today.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should let them, you know, maybe try and find someone to cover the shift. You know, because that's just how your brain, for like, when you go through something like that, I've learned that your body tries to make things as normal as possible to keep you as sane as possible. And it's such a, I keep using the word fascinating, but the longer I'm divorced from the moment itself, the more I can look back and really be in awe of how you function under something like that. And then that's sort of where the vividness of my memory ends, because so much happens after that. You have to think about so much. You have to get so much in line. So many people talk to you and message you and visit you.
Yes.
And I don't even remember if you visited that next morning. Did you?
I came over with a bunch of leaders, and I jumped in the van.
Heather was there. I know Moshel was there. You were there. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't even remember who all.
Fragments are what I remember. But I remember that, and this is one of the reasons why I will always stick up for the water parks, because they were so genuinely kind and compassionate after that.
Yeah.
They put together so much food. I don't know if we ate it all. I know we gave some to her family to take back because they were on a swim team at that point. Leanna's younger sister.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, these kids they eat, so take, And we didn't have to worry about food for a while. We didn't have to worry about stuff to drink for a while. And I don't think I ate like actual food for a day and a half because it took me like 36 hours to actually to where it wasn't even me going to sleep. It was your body being like, we're going to die if we don't rest.
Right.
And so I don't remember much after that. I remember it's about as vivid as I can recall.
Yeah, and you're right though. The water parks, it's such a family.
It is. It's so small
because
those
it's
people,
small.
And you work around them, and they know your life. They know your kids.
Yes. When I first came to water parks, I thought like that was one of the things that interested me. I did not want to go to water parks, to be honest. I was talked into it, pretty much, and there was opportunity there, and then when I learned what winters are like for scheduling, then I was like, wow, this was a bad idea. Holy shit, 32 hours is not going to pay the bills, that kind of stuff, right? But because it's such a small thing, in the Magic Kingdom, in Animal Kingdom, in the resorts, you are your department, and that's your family, right? So in the resorts, I was in front desk, and in some resorts more than others, but for the most part, not at all. We didn't mingle with the food and beverage team. We didn't mingle with the merchandise team. Like, you knew the key players you needed to know when you had a pissed off guest at the desk that needed help solving a problem.
Right.
But that was it, right? And in the parks, I was in attractions for the most part. Again, food and beverage, merchandise, custodial even. We didn't really know. But my God, the water parks.
You knew everybody. All lines of business. This because it's the same people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was very, very much a family environment. I remember. Here's what I remember. I got a text from Shane that following morning. Morning, saying, "Hey, this is what happened." And then immediately I remembered earlier that day. I don't even remember who was with me. We were in the parking lot at like row 4, looking up at the sky at helicopters circling like buzzards. And somebody I think somebody made a joke about, like, said something about it that was probably off color. And I don't remember, like, that's all I remember about that. Sure. I remember, oh fuck, I bet that's what that was.
It's funny you meant, because I completely forgot about this until you just jogged my memory. As I was driving into work, I was a few minutes late, and I think I actually sent you a text message saying, because you were my leader at the time. And I remember saying, like, hey, I'm going to be a few minutes late. There's, I think, some sort of accident.
Yeah.
And I remember even posting on Facebook, like, hey, there's a bad accident.
Yes, that's
I remember
right.
that.
I remember that. I just forgot about this until just now. It wasn't an essential thing to remember until just now.
Yeah.
I remember posting about it on Facebook, like, hey, there's a bad accident. Stay safe, everybody.
I do remember that because I remember after it happened, I was like, Facebook stalking your page.
Sure.
And I was like, oh my gosh, she made a post about an accident.
Yeah, I don't do the time hop thing. And so I get whatever one thing Facebook says, like, you might like this person in your picture 2 years later. But I don't do what I post, and I'm glad because
that's not something you want to relive.
It's almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years at the end of May. And, this is the most I've ever talked about it to someone who wasn't a therapist.
Right.
Certainly recorded or anything like that. So I had forgotten about that I got stuck in the traffic from the accident. I was on World Drive.
Goodness.
Or not World Drive, Epcot Center Drive, and I actually had to make a left behind what was the Nickelodeon Studios.
Yeah.
And take that way in.
Back way in.
Because that was all closed. And I remember the helicopters.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after that I put 2 and 2 together, and actually every time I still hear a helicopter, I get kind of freaked out.
Whoa.
I bet.
Well, you're programmed differently
there
now.
Are cues that draw you back to that moment.
You're programmed differently now. So now every time you hear I hear a helicopter, now all of a sudden I'm doing like an inventory, like, where are my friends? What did they work today? Where are they working? And that still happens. Not as much as it used to. I used to, I had, when I returned to work after that, it was real difficult because they have those sightseeing helicopters.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That, and so you hear it And as long as they're flying over, it's fine. The minute they're stopped in the sky, you get real freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I remember for us, I mean, we'll kind of move into the grief and recovery phase of your story here. I remember for us as, you know, as the water parks leadership team, you know, again, like whatever you need, man. Like we just didn't know, like we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to, you know, all we could do was go, you tell us what you need. You come back when you're ready to come back. And even then, when you said you're ready to come back, we were like, are you sure about that? Like, seriously, take a little more time if you need to.
I only took a week.
Yeah. Like, I don't know that a week's enough, or, you know, but like from the company side of things, like I remember that, and I remember thinking through things like, you know, because it's a unionized environment, we often have some bullshit problems where shop stewards get douchey about things.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's FMLA, and that law applies to very specific things and for a specific time set. And, you know, there's certain templates that apply for time off and all of that kind of stuff. And we were just like, fuck it, take me to court, or what, you know, take me to Disney court. You try it.
Right.
This guy gets whatever he needs, because there's no way that there was no template to apply to that.
Yeah. I remember them granting me bereavement, and Gene, our GM at the time, who I will sing praises to for as long as I live, because I never would have expected her, like, here's my personal phone number.
Yep.
If you need absolutely anything, call me. If I understand, you know, because we work together at the water park. Mm-hmm. So she was, you know, if this is too much, let me know. We'll put you somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's no harm, no foul, no nothing.
Yep.
And so she was the one that confirmed that I was on bereavement leave, which we're not married. It's not a parent, nothing like that. And so they put me out on a week's bereavement, which legally they don't have to do.
Right.
And so they did that again out of the kindness of their hearts, essentially.
Right.
Which makes sense from a human point of view, but that's not how big companies work sometimes.
Right.
So, but that's how it worked for me.
Yep.
And I remember, I think it was after a day or two, she's buried back up in North Florida. And so I remember going up there for the funeral, coming back down, having like a day, and then going back to work. And I remember people saying, like, you should take more time. But more time wasn't to do what? To sit around and, you know, I'm having something to do, even if I'm not good at it.
Yeah, I need something to put my brain on.
Because I can tell you, for the first month I was back, I wasn't useful. That's for sure. I wasn't getting into guest situations.
Yeah.
And there were days I went to some of the leadership team. I think Ron even asked, like, hey, do you want to be pulled out? I got to put stickers on radios. These new radios we're getting in, those big clunky ones, when we were getting those in. And I need labels made, and I need you to...
Yep.
And I'm like, you know what? Fine. And I'm usually not one of those, like, I can't handle it people, but I was in a place where I could recognize, like, yep, maybe something different is great.
Yep.
And so it took me a while to get back into it. And it's hard because you're back in a workplace that knew both of you.
Yes.
They know what's going on. It's the elephant in the room.
Yep.
You know, and so it wasn't just hard for me. You know, they had she was working in that area a year before I joined the team.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
And so they all knew her longer than they knew me.
I had worked with her on Main Street.
Yeah.
Even before that.
She was deployed. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so there's a lot of people who were aware of the situation. And it was hard because people want to help. They're good people and they want to help, and it's going to be okay. And what can we do? And it's easy to feel that. But when you're looking at someone that's grieving like that, how do you even approach it? How do you even bring it up?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can...
And not have it just be platitude, because I know there's really nothing I can do, but I want you to know that I'm feeling for you right now. You know, how do you approach that conversation without pulling the trigger?
For me, so I've read things online where people get really angry and offended by I'm here for you. If you need anything, reach out. And that never bothered me. There are a lot of people who... There was another thing that sort of I thought about, and there's a lot of people, you know, I'm praying for you, you know, I'm
right.
And And I'm not a religious person, sort of culturally Jewish, and that's it.
Right.
But you have to sort of separate, because it's so easy to fall into you're praying for me. Oh, you believe that God did everything. Ipso facto, God killed my girlfriend. How dare you?
How dare you?
But that never occurred to me. When I heard, I'm praying for you, sending prayers. They're saying they're sending good wishes out to you.
Yep.
And that's where it's coming from. Their way of doing that is by praying.
Yep.
It costs them nothing to do it. Doesn't hurt me.
Yep.
They're thinking about me.
Right.
And that's sort of, you have to come at it from that angle. No one said to me the whole everything happens for a reason. Thank God, because I know those people are out there.
Yes.
And I that's would have, I think, made me lose it, but everyone was sensitive to the fact that this didn't need to happen. There was a reason for this.
Right.
Even all the, and I'm sure we'll talk at where I'm at now and the place I'm at now, in just a minute, but even as well as I'm doing now, there's no reason for that to have happened to trigger as well as I'm doing now, because I was doing fine then as well.
Right.
And so I'm glad that didn't happen. That people were sensitive enough to understand,
right.
This is pretty shitty.
Yeah.
There's no reason for this, but everyone handled it really, really well. They didn't bring it up much at work. They knew that I needed to laugh because I joke around a lot, as anyone who's been listening for the last hour and 50 minutes knows. I say stupid shit, and that's how it's a defense mechanism. You laugh, you don't worry about anything else when you laugh.
Yep.
And it took me a long time to find stuff funny again, which sucked because that's such a big part of my identity is being jokey.
So true. Yes.
And it took me, I almost ruined my closest relationship with my friend David, because he recognized that I'm not laughing anymore, and he tried to be funny, and I snapped on him one day and I said listen, I'm
not ready for that shit yet, man.
It's not funny.
Right.
And that almost ruined stuff. We're now in the best place between two people we've ever been,
right?
Friend wise, you know what I mean? It's never been stronger. He's getting married. He's in the Air Force. He just got back from the Middle East. We're in a good, close place. And even after all the years, after all the bullshit, I've learned about all the emotional duress he went through trying to be the strong person in all of this.
Right.
Your appreciation only grows from that. But it took me a while to learn how to be funny, to joke again.
Right.
Because when something like this happens, you almost feel guilty joking about anything.
Yes.
About anything.
Right.
And so it took me a while to get there, but you do get there eventually. You have to allow yourself to get there.
Right.
Because your options are, you get there and you start to recover and you seek the help you need to move forward, or you don't. Or you don't. Or you can be miserable for the rest of your life, however long you choose that to be.
Yeah.
And that wasn't my style.
Yeah.
And you always think about what the other person would have wanted. That path was never an option. It was always going to be the hard path moving forward.
Yeah. So you spent time in therapy.
I did. Supplied by Disney, by the way.
Disney, yeah. Disney is great when it comes to mental health, behavioral health care benefits.
Sure.
They're probably top notch when it comes to that.
Sure.
And that's, my God, that's good, because there are so many things that you think you can get through it on your own, but you can't. But definitely something like this, a mental health professional required.
And it took a while, and it wasn't me going every week. It was me starting off going every week, and that went on for a little while. And then after that, it's how often do I need it?
Right.
It's not, I don't expect you to fix me. It's give me the tools to make this hurt less throughout the day.
Right.
And that's exactly what she did. Her name was Phyllis Phipps. If I ever see this woman again, I will hug her, because she was this very calm, older Southern lady. And she had such just a calming demeanor. You could say that she was listening and absorbing everything. And she did a lot of the coping tools that I still use if I have a bad day, because anniversaries happen.
Yes.
Birthdays happen. Just went through a birthday March 4th, which coincidentally is her dad's birthday. So, me and her younger sister shared the same birthday, August 17th. And then her, Leanna, and her dad shared the... So that's... I don't... I don't know how he gets through.
No.
I know he does it by some years he's gone kayaking. She was a nature advocate. And so sometimes he'll just spend that out there with her, so to speak.
Right.
I have friends that do the same thing. On her birthday, they do things that she would have done.
Yeah.
Go to a zoo, walk. Even, that's the best way to get that out.
Right.
Is to acknowledge it.
Yes.
Get it out, celebrate it. That's the best way to do that.
Yeah.
I totally forgot what I was.
You were. It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. You were in therapy.
Yeah.
Coping mechanism.
Yeah. And so I remember vividly one of the coping mechanisms she said is, listen, don't try to not be sad about this, because that's going to happen 100%, probably forever.
Yep.
And it was her acknowledgement of, like, this is not going to get fully better ever.
Right.
This is something you have to learn to live with.
Yeah.
And so one of the things she said is, like, listen, if you ever feel yourself coming down and really getting ready to go into a low place, you got to tell yourself, nope, not right now. I'll allow 15 minutes for this later in the day.
Schedule it.
Schedule.
Yeah.
It's on the calendar for when I'm home and I can sit in the bathroom and just cry.
Yep.
But not right now. You got shit to do right now. Okay. And I found that scheduling it allows your body to be like because your brain is very like itemized and organized. It allows you to say, all right, so we're not going to, we can get rid of that later. And I still find myself doing that. Sometimes it's at work even now, because I worked on her birthday this just a few days ago. And I'm in a good place now because I'm in a place where a lot of people don't know my history.
Right.
Some of them do, because they ask around, and Disney's 70,000 people, but it's not.
No.
It's so much closer knit than that number
6
suggests.
6 degrees of separation, easy.
Yeah, if that, right? And so people know. And it's just, I don't have to, I pride myself on not showing that at work. And sometimes it's hard. And as much as you do that scheduling thing where later I'll allow for it, sometimes I just need 5 minutes to walk around the building.
Yep.
Just give me 5 minutes to think about something else. Maybe I'll cry it out near the gym, and then I'll come back and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it just happens. It doesn't hit me all of a sudden like it used to. Now I can sort of plan when I choose for it to hit.
Right.
Now there are things that a song you'll hear or something you'll see, and you don't choose it, and you know what? You're in Publix and you're crying at the pasta, and that's we're going to be there for 2 minutes, and then we'll move to the dairy aisle. But that's where you're at in that moment, and it's a lot of it's just learning that you're not going to control when it hits, how it hits, where. You just got to learn to roll with it, and it doesn't make you a weak person for feeling it.
Right. Absolutely. And I think like this Phyllis, right? Highly trained professional, like knows her stuff.
Yeah.
I could not imagine like being in the grief counseling business, because, and maybe this is a kind of a spiritual way of thinking about it, but like she's got to take a piece of every person she's helped. There's a piece of that she absorbs and takes with her.
Just like I'm sure those officers that have to night in, night out tell their family someone's killed in a car accident or someone was murdered or there was a fire. Or I don't know how you do that.
No.
And that's one of the things that was so helpful to me is talking to someone about it who was completely out of the loop, unrelated, doesn't know me, doesn't care. They don't have to personally attach themselves that way.
Right.
I could say whatever I wanted to, know that it wasn't going to leave that room, how I'm feeling.
Yep.
And it allowed me to get it out and not dump that on people who were close to the situation. But you are a real special person that has to want to do that for somebody else.
Yep.
Because as much as you can tell yourself, or that I could tell myself, I'm divorced from the situation of that person. I know it now. And I couldn't separate that, the home and the work part of that. I couldn't do it. So I don't know how they do it, but
right. Well, it's probably another psychological training, right?
I'm sure.
Just like you're taught how to prepare and schedule and handle things as they happen. I'm sure they're trained in how to compartmentalize and say, okay, this is work and I have to flip a switch somehow when I leave. So now, today, you're in a good place.
I'm in a very good place. Yeah. I met my my now girlfriend, Danny, who is one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. One of the kindest humans I've ever met in my life. One of the most compassionate people I've ever met in my life. We'll be together for 2 years in May. And so it was just about 2 years after that I first allowed myself to go back out into that space and
open up
and just sort of test the water. I wasn't looking for a relationship, but I had made the decision I would allow myself to do that again if the situation ever arose. Because before that, you don't even want it.
No.
You feel treacherous and guilty and the guilt is a totally normal feeling for anyone who's experienced that loss. I don't care how old you were. I don't care what the circumstances are. Someone died of cancer or anything. Going back out there again is not easy. And you have to allow yourself to do it. And you have to, I think for me, it comes from what would that person have wanted? If it were me in that situation, it were flipped, what would I have wanted? Right. And so you take a while to get there. And I just made the decision that I'm not going to banish this possibility. I'm not looking for it, but I'm
but if it happens, I'll let it.
Yeah. It's now an option again.
Right.
But the circumstances have to be right. I come with a lot of baggage. I know that. And whoever this other person is
has to know that.
But right off the bat, I'm talking like, hi, my name's Jake. Girlfriend was killed. Like going through some shit still.
Yep.
That's part of the introduction. Almost like, cause I feel guilty that not being right off the bat. I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I'm not into tattoos to tattoo it on my forehead. So it has to be really early in the conversation. And so I remember, my girlfriend now had also worked at the water parks, was an operating cast member sort of within the water parks, not part of water parks itself, but we're loaned, in a service respect. So, I wasn't really familiar with who she was. I knew of her through other people. So in other social settings I had been since then, I had seen her. I had heard the name before.
Yep.
Never spent time. She was always at Blizzard Beach. I was, at the time, always at the other water park, Typhoon Lagoon. And so we never really crossed paths or anything. And then, they had lost some staff over at Blizzard Beach, and so they needed extra help.
Yep.
People are sort of along party lines at water parks.
They very much are.
And so I was welcoming a change. Any sort of, it's another challenge. It's something different. And so I volunteered to go over. One of the best decisions I ever made.
Yep.
Because there are some great people over at that space as well. And it allowed me to work with Danny and get to know her a little bit.
Yep.
Found out that she was real chill, real cool. There was no ego in the role she was in. Sometimes there's that.
Yes.
The word platitude does come up a lot.
Yeah. PLAID for those of you out
in the pattern.
Out of the
you
circle.
know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it takes a different type of person to not let that get to you, because as you're moving up the rung in Disney, it's not a small step. I mean, that's a launching point for a lot of people's career.
Yeah.
And so people are cognizant of that type of thing. But she was very cool about it. She knew her role in the operation. It was sort of refreshing, and we just started talking, and it was a lot of fun. And I had made the decision that I was gonna ask her out and see how that went. And this may determine if I ever do that again. And we'll see what happens. And it went well. She said yes. And so the day before the actual date, the dinner, we sat down at Starbucks after work at Disney Springs, what is now Disney Springs, then downtown Disney. And we sat and we kind of joked, and that's when I told her, like, listen, I'm sure someone in your department has mentioned this, because we were very close. Departments were real.
Yes.
I got cards from them after everything happened, and money. It is just insane. And so I basically was like, this is my baggage. This is totally a forgivable out. I will not penalize you for being like, I can't do this.
Right.
Because it's heavy.
Yeah.
This is a heavy thing to have to deal with. And she didn't say no. I accept that. I get that, this is part of you. I would never hold that against you. And I think one of the things that I am most appreciative about for her is there's no penalization for me talking about Leanna. Ever.
And I think that would be hard for some people. Some people would be, oh my God, he's it's like circumstances are different, sure. But it's that feeling where, oh, well, he's talking about the ex-girlfriend a lot.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
what the fuck? I'm with you now.
Yeah,
Like,
and I wouldn't even blame them for feeling that way.
Or comparing me against them and that kind of
It's like
feeling,
competing with the perfection of a ghost.
Right.
Yeah,
basically.
you're competing with ghosts. It's hard.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've tried hard to do is not to hold her on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. She's a person. You can't deify someone like that. It'll just make things worse.
Right.
She had faults.
Yep.
She had quirks.
Yep.
She snored.
Right.
She was a human.
There's some things I loved about you, and there's some things that drove me nuts.
Yeah, but
there's some things I love about you, and some things that drive me nuts.
it's
And
human
that's
relationship.
just
That's the way that works.
Yeah.
And that's the healthiest way to deal with that, is to not hold this person as, the most amazing and
Right.
she was Leanna was the most. I've never found someone with the passion for nature like that. And since I have never met a person with that kind of that kind of clear vision of, this is what I want my life to mean.
Yes.
Period. I don't know how I'm going to get there just yet, but I know the end goal already. I know the impact I want to make and who and what I want to affect.
Yep.
Let's just see if I can get there. And so it's super important for me to be able to talk about that person, because that person is a part of my life, will always be a part of my life. We've visited the cemetery together, when we go up to North Florida, and I know that's always difficult for Danny. It's difficult for me, but she understands. And I think that's one of the reasons this has been so successful, is she gets it. It's never held against me in any respect. Even if we have a little tiff or an argument, that is never held against me. And I think that's one of the reasons I know that she's such a kind, decent human being.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because not, like you said, and holding no one else against it. It's just some people just they can't put themselves there. And I don't blame them for not wanting to put themselves in that situation. Because it's a lot of tears sometimes, man. So it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's awesome for her to be able to say, no, man, I'm in that moment with you.
It's beyond
let
awesome.
it go.
Yeah.
Let it go. I'm here.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you got that.
Me too.
I'm so glad.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Me too.
Jake, you are official now. You can come whenever you want. You've got a seat.
Yes.
This has been, I really can't thank you guys enough for having me out. This is such a cool.
We won't make you cry
Such a cool
in the
endeavor.
future.
Yeah.
No, I'm surprised I got through it without shedding a tear, because that doesn't happen. I always get that knot in my stomach and all, but
you're going to hear me say this a lot, especially if you've been listening for a long time. But again, it's important that we tell our stories.
Yeah.
Because there's somebody else out there right now who's going through, and the beauty of podcasting is it's not like radio. It's not like you have to be listening to it while it happens,
Yeah,
right?
it's recorded,
5 years from now, 10 years from now, somebody may dig back up through an old episode and go, holy shit, I needed to hear that.
Yep.
I needed to hear that the therapist is going to be helpful. I needed to hear that, it's not going to be great all the time forever, but that it is going to be better. And that there is happiness on the other side of this tragic event. And you're going to help people by being outspoken about it.
I hope so.
So I appreciate you being willing to kind of open that wound up again and share your heart with us.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on to do it. I really do.
That was episode 46 with my personal friend, Jake Vahaba. Jake, brother, we absolutely love you. And I'm glad that we were able to present this as part of our year-end reflection, because exactly those reasons, right? There's new listeners who haven't gone back and binged from the old episodes, and I don't blame you. It's a lot of stuff to listen to, and if you're like me, you listen to lots of podcasts, and there's just no way that you can go back and listen to the entire backlog. So I'm glad that Jake's story made it into our year-end review. Up next was episode 56. We talked to Harry Stewart, who created a really cool summer camp option for LGBTQ kids in Canada. We were able to help use our voice to lift up his program and get it some more exposure and hopefully raise a little money to help them out. And we will definitely be in touch with him again as their next season starts cranking up to see what we can do to help them. This is episode 56, Harry Stewart with Rainbow Camp. Harry Stewart is the founder of Rainbow Camp and is the chair and president of Welcome Friend Association, which hosts the camp. And he joins us now. Harry, welcome to SarahTalk.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
I'm super excited to have you on and share the camp with our listeners here. First, let's talk a little bit about you, your story, kind of how you came to start this organization and eventually the camp.
I actually come from a religious background, the United Church of Canada, and I got married here in a small town of 1,400 people, and we, because of my involvement with the local church, my partner and I felt somewhat disconnected. So we created this organization to help bridge the faith community and the local LGBT community in the area and try and bring them together.
That's awesome.
We did a couple of conferences, and then it became pretty apparent that there was nothing for kids.
Yeah. Now, I grew up in a small town of about 1,400 myself, so we probably connect on that small town experience. And this was true for me, perhaps for you as well, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and being gay was still always talked about in hushed tones. Being a small town, everyone knows everyone, everybody knows everybody's business. What was that like for you growing up?
It was hard. I pretty much figured out where I was when I was 15 or 16, but I didn't come out until I was 19. I came out then because the next step for me was getting married, because I was going out with a local girl during high school just to fit in.
Mm-hmm. And there was no support system, of course, in a small town like that?
No, and actually the high school that I went to, there was no support either.
Gosh. Now, that's a very common theme in the conversations that we have with folks from small towns. And it's really frustrating knowing, I never had any affirmation or support system. Like, if anyone had found out back then that I was cross-dressing, and remember, like, transgender was not even a word back then, exactly. it would have been a major scandal. Is that gap in support something that led you to create the Welcome Friend Association and then ultimately the Rainbow Camp?
Yeah, it became apparent that there was really nothing for the kids, and actually, like you said, not a lot of change. Like in Canada, we have a lot of LGBT friendly laws and all this kind of stuff, but whereas our society hasn't quite caught up.
Yeah,
and a lot of our kids are coming to us. They're coming from cities too, but small towns, and even in the cities, we hear the same story, that they just have nowhere to fit in. They can still feel alone.
Now let's talk about the camp. It's a 1-week camp in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is right near the border with Michigan, right? Give us a little overview of what the camp experience is like.
Okay. As you said, we're right on top of Michigan, and we fly most of our kids fly in from into the airport, and the camp is actually about an hour away, and it is in the middle of nowhere. It's not far from my local hometown, but still the kids are going from rural settings or city settings into the bush, basically.
Run into the bush.
Bush.
Run in the bush.
In the bush. The forest with the bugs.
Yeah.
And it was fun. The first year we did it, I remember one girl getting off the plane and wanting to know where the mall stop was.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow.
She passed it.
Yeah. You missed that stop.
You flew over it, honey. No.
What's a mall?
How far away? I just can't believe I haven't mapped this. You guys know me better. How far away is the nearest Timmy's? That's the most important thing.
It is. The nearest Timmy's is 50 minutes away.
Oh my God, I'd die.
I couldn't do it.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's all right. You have to move the camp.
Yeah, the nearest theater is an hour away. So
Wow.
if we want to go see shows or anything, it's an hour drive. One way.
You get away from it all, right?
We're talking about you're definitely
it's
getting
camp.
away.
Right.
I mean, Timmy sells bag coffee.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I guess you could stock up if you had a really good,
You can have a good coffee maker.
coffee maker.
What's the closest thing to you?
The closest thing to it in regards to
Civilization.
well, Sault Ste. Marie is about 70 or 80,000 people. Then it just go across. We call it the ditch, but go across to Sault, Michigan. It's a smaller city. Toronto is 6.5 hours away.
Wow.
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 Don't plan on going there.
So if you want a good meal, you better have a chef with you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hot dogs and s'mores for days.
we have some good restaurants, but I hear you.
So one thing I really appreciated was the on your website, the all gender restroom sign. It reads, "This bathroom has been liberated from the gender binary." I love that. It's fantastic. I wondered though, given the way adults have a hard problem with gender overall, as we're seeing with legislation all over the states, have you had concerns from parents or campers, or do they kind of come in with a basic understanding of how all this really works? And what about cabin assignments? Is in a world where we understand there to be more than two gender identities, how are the cabins set up? And sorry, that's a lot of questions all at once.
Okay, well, I'll start with the cabins because then it'll tie into the washroom.
Okay.
The cabins are based on age, not gender.
Okay.
And it works really well. We have counselors in the cabins at night so that the kids always have support and whatever. But yeah, we break the kids. This year we're doing two 1 week camps, ages 12 to 14 and 15 to 17. And if there's 35 kids on site, there's another 35 / volunteer / counselor. So our ratio is 1 to 1.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
That's great.
We work really, really hard at creating safe space. And it starts with the cabins, and then with the washrooms. The camp facility has gender bathrooms, but we cover up the urinal stalls, and it doesn't take long for the kids just to feel comfortable in whichever one they want to go in.
That's so cool. So cool. Now, as far as the camp goes, you do traditional campy type things like canoeing and swimming and that sort of thing, but you also host interesting workshops. How is the Rainbow Camp different in this way from perhaps maybe a normal, quote, normal summer camp?
We do sessions. As you said, we do an educational component. One of the things when we were founding Rainbow Camp and Welcome Friend Association, we wanted to become a charitable organization. And camps up in Canada don't automatically fall under as a charitable status. So either 60% of your time has to be religious or education. And for the kids, it was pretty important for us to be able to help educate them. In 2012, it was just getting the terms and finding out what they were and where they fit in. Last year, the kids have all the LGBT, the whole spectrum. They know what everything is. They just don't know where they fit in.
Yeah.
So we run anti-bullying. We do sex education. We do trans workshops, yoga, self-defense. There's usually 2 or 3 things going on at one time so that the kids can pick what they want to go to.
That's cool. And I saw on your website as well, like social activism and legal rights, and you're exploring some things that obviously, our binary system, right? I'm sure Canadian schools are not for too much further ahead than, although every time I read the news, you guys are way out in front of us. But as far as, teaching sex ed in schools, like what these kids are learning, it probably has many, many, many gaps if you don't fit into the gender or sexual binary.
Exactly.
Well, what's the atmosphere in those sessions like? Is it like a counselor guided open discussion? Is there, do they kind of have an agenda and talking points? What's that like?
It varies on the workshop.
Okay.
So some things are led, and some things just kind of develop. We had one counselor last year that was, for lack of a better term, going through the process of change, and so shared an awful lot of the transformation process.
Wow.
And the kids loved it. 75% of our kids last year were trans.
Oh, that's crazy.
Wow, that's a large number.
And all of our counselors started off as female.
Wow. That's very interesting. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. I mean, there's nothing like Rainbow Camp in my mind, but there's nothing like seeing these kids coming in. And I'll be honest, they look pretty terrified because they're in the middle of nowhere. They're out of their comfort zone. And within a couple of hours, they've figured it out.
Yeah.
And we work really, really, really hard at creating safe space. So they know that no matter what they're going through or where they are, we're there for them. And that's what we tell the counselors. It's not about the counselors. If you came thinking that you were going to be, oh, this is all about, being a counselor and how great it is. No, it's all about the kids.
Now, the only summer camp available in my little farm hick town was hosted by one of the 7 churches in town. Only one of them had a youth group, and the one year they talked me into going to church camp. And of course, the primary purpose was really to proselytize. That was their goal, It was the most uncomfortable thing in the world. I remember I was probably in the beginnings of feeling different. Like, I didn't know that there was a gender thing going on. I didn't really know what was going on, but I definitely felt like I didn't fit in with this crowd. And I was sitting in the church waiting to load up the vans to leave. I'll never forget this, and I have a terrible memory, so it says a lot. I'm sitting waiting for the van, playing my guitar, and a string snapped on the guitar, and I didn't have a spare. Right? Now, back then, I was still a believer, so I applied my best confirmation bias and attributed this as the sign from God that I was waiting for that meant I didn't go. I shouldn't go, and so I didn't go. What I think is cool about your camp is that it's specifically set up to be accepting and that it meets people where they are. Obviously, keeping privacy in mind, is there a success story or two you can share from the campers? Like, have you, as someone closeted, decided to come out to their family after the experience, or campers that have come back as staff? Like, how is the camp changing lives?
I'll give you one example comes to mind really quick. It was our first year, actually, and this young man, the camp comes in on a Sunday, and it was Monday morning. We were doing one of the sessions or whatever, and he said to the group, he said, my mom found some dresses in my closet a couple of months ago, and I told them they were my sister. And I guess when he got out of the car with his luggage, he had the dresses with him, and he said, Mom, I just want you to know that I lied to you. These are my dresses. And he told the kids, who he'd only, not even 24 hours, said to the kids that he felt so safe with them that he would like to put the dress on at lunchtime.
Oh my God, that's so amazing.
The kids, I mean, it was just awesome. He came out, he was stunning. He was himself, and we still keep in touch with him and his mom. And his mom credits camp for saving her son's life.
Gosh, that's so amazing.
It's pretty cool, and there's lots of stories of, and now that we've done it, this is our 6th year, so we're getting camp culture now. So kids are coming back. We have one trans kid that was at camp and now is a counselor, going to be a counselor again this year, so twice, and it's just really cool to see the development happening.
So let's talk about the leader in training program too. As far speaking of development. Who can become a camp counselor, and what kind of training do they get?
Most of our counselors are coming from some sort of social worker program, whether it be child and youth.
Okay.
But they're 19, 20, 21. They're older. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is because we stopped camp at 17, there's kind of this gap for the 18 or 19-year-olds.
Right.
So we're doing it for 2 reasons. And one is very selfish, and one is for the kids, because they want to continue on with camping. So the 18 and 19-year-olds will be part of the older kids camp and doing some training, and then we'll actually be working with the younger kids the second week. And that's for 2 things. One is to help build up self-esteem and know what's going on with camp. But because we're 1 week, and because basically the counselors are on for 24 hours a day, the counselors are wiped. So as we grow, that's one of the things that we have to look at is how do we save our counselors' energy level. And one of the things that we thought was this would be a really great way to help spread the workload and to help them understand what it's like to be a counselor.
So now you're gearing up for August, right?
Yep.
August 13th through the 18th is the kind of the older group, 15 to 17, and that's also when you're doing the Leaders in Training program.
Yep.
And then August 20th through 25th is the younger group, 12 through 14, right?
Yes. I was going to say a little bit on the CIT training stuff too. Is a lot of our youth are last to be picked in social activities and things like that too. So the CIT is to help give them some self-esteem and to really feel appreciated.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I was the last in everything.
Me too.
Always.
Me too. No one picked me.
No.
Never. Nobody ever even picked me for Red Rover.
I was a tall one. They never picked me for basketball. I'm 6'3", and they were like, "Oh yeah, he's awkward.
Yeah.
Let him stay in the corner. He probably feels more comfortable there. Someone give him a milkshake."
But it's interesting because I had I learned mechanisms to kind of work around that stuff when I was a kid. Like, again, I would always be picked last. Nobody wanted me on their team. But like when we'd play softball in PE, right? I couldn't bat for shit, and everybody knew it. I was the one where when I came up to the plate, they would all right, everybody come in closer, right? You know, and so I had, and it helped that my uncle was the PE teacher, and I kind of get away with whatever I wanted. But as I would be in line, and as the next kid would come back from running the bases or whatever, and come back into the batting lineup, I would just be like, "Hey, Michael, you want to go in front of me?" And so I was like perpetually the last kid in line on purpose, so that I didn't have to bat because they were going to make me feel like shit.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a morale boosting, self-esteem boosting program like this. And God, I wish I had.
One of the things that we also tell the kids is they don't have to participate in anything. If we're doing capture the flag or canoeing or swimming, they can opt out because most of our kids have always been told what they have to do. So we want to empower them. Now they have to be at the site of the activity so we can see so they're still a part of it, but they're not actively, and it's not a problem. And you'll find that, we find by the second or third day, they're in there anyway.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
But the option is to make sure that the camper knows that they don't have to do anything.
That's awesome.
Yeah, when they feel like they're forced to do something, sometimes kids can, feel like they're being, forced to do something.
Right?
Yeah.
Or even conforming, right? I mean, you're forced to conform 51 weeks of the year, so let's give them a week that they can be themselves.
That's amazing.
So if people want to find out more about the camp, the website is rainbowcamp.ca, and of course we'll have all the links in the show notes of this episode 56. But I wanted to make sure to take a moment first to talk about the cost of sending someone to camp. Now, this is the critical piece, and I would imagine you have campers who want to come, who may come from less privileged communities. Talk a little bit about the cost of operating Rainbow Camp and the sponsorships that help offset that cost, and about your fundraiser.
Sure. Camp registration is $350. That is for the 5 days, and if the camper cannot afford that, then we will help. We will sponsor them. We can provide travel to and from camp from anywhere in Canada, and we have worked on working with kids from the U.S. as well. The actual cost per camper is about $2,000. Our budget for a 2-week camp is $100,000.
Oh, wow.
And it's my partner and I, we work pretty much full-time now doing fundraising. And we have, if you go to helprainbowcamp.com, we have a GoFundMe or a fundraising site that is helping raise funds. Our goal, we need $40,000, and we have till the end of the second week in June, I believe, is our cutoff date, and then we have to make a decision. Our 15 to 17-year-old camp is full, and we're on a waiting list.
Wow. And
filling up quickly with the younger kids, but we may have to cut a week.
Oh, wow.
And that's pretty sad because it's the first time we've been able to offer the 2 weeks, but it comes down to dollars and cents.
Sure.
And we have Colin Mockery and his wife Deborah McGrath as spokespeople.
That's awesome. I love Colin.
Yeah, so it's been pretty amazing, but it's really, I mean, if everybody donated $10, it would be truly amazing. But it's hard. We've got Twitter going, and I'm getting my emails getting plugged up with the retweets and all this sort of stuff. But we've raised I think about $9,500, and I need $40,000. Sorry.
Right. So we have a little ways to go, and
yes. No pressure at all. No stress on my part. No.
Why would that be stressful?
Yeah, right.
You need Oprah.
Oh,
Oh, God.
Or Ellen.
Or, yeah.
Ellen might be better for this.
Ellen might be able to help you out there.
But seriously, like, retire, they said. You'll relax and enjoy your later years, they said.
Yeah, I need a vacation from retirement.
Right.
You got to start a GoFundMe page for that one.
I'm serious. You need to get a hold of Ellen. She knows people at Shutterfly. They give out checks all the time.
Oh, we're trying. One really unique thing that happened to us last year and the year before is we had a film crew on site. A private company came in and got release forms and everything, and it's being privately funded. They have a sizzle reel out right now, and they hope to have a 75-minute documentary and premiere it in September.
Oh, wow.
Which would be really awesome. Doesn't help me right now, but
yeah,
it'll certainly bring attention, hopefully, to camp and what we're doing.
Well, obviously, we'll do anything we can to help out, and I would encourage all of our listeners to check out Rainbow Camp and help fund the program. Anything we can do to help support LGBT youth is absolutely worth it. It's programs like this. One of these days, we're going to look back and think, do you remember when the trans suicide rate was 41%? Because I'm telling you, programs like this will create and reinforce support structures that these kids will use all throughout their lives and may likely be saving lives. Yeah. Literally saving lives. The education you guys are doing is awesome and very much needed in our community. And I just really think that affirming programs for kids are so necessary for their well-being, and they're learning skills that apply outside of their sexual or gender experiences too, and that's fantastic. It's a well-rounded program.
I have to say it's pretty cool. On another note, every day we check in to see what their pronouns are and what their gender is, because it does change.
Yeah.
Which for this old guy can be confusing, but it's okay. I don't mind. That's what it's all about.
But you've created the atmosphere where they feel safe enough to say, hey, it's changed today. Yeah. Yep. That's awesome.
So Bobby might want to be Michelle, and it's pretty cool. And the neat thing is, like you said, it's safe space. So it just Porter Airlines is it's another airline in Canada, and last year they allowed all the kids to use their preferred names on their boarding pass.
Oh, that's so cool.
It was so cool.
That's cool.
Just amazing.
Wow. Well,
just to see the name you like to see and make you feel more comfortable on a piece of paper, even if they're not shouting, Elizabeth, are you here? Just to have that little piece of paper to hand to the staff. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
The affirmation is a big thing.
The smaller the thing, sometimes the bigger the feeling.
Yep.
All right. Again, if folks want to learn more, register for camp, which is pretty well full at the larger group, but we definitely need people to help fundraise.
Yeah.
Get more information about the Leaders in Training program. The website is rainbowcamp.ca. And for the fundraiser, visit helprainbowcamp.com. And of course, again, we'll have all these links in the show notes for episode 56 as well. Harry, thank you for joining us today, and especially for the wonderful things you're doing with these kids. I really wish this had been something I had when I was a kid. And
I wish you guys were closer. I would totally want to be over there and just kind of help out and give.
Be the
camp counselor, right?
Be a camp counselor. I'll be the best counselor ever in the world.
There you go. Well, it's really not that far. Come on now.
I'm going to start walking right now.
You might get there in time for camp.
We'd love to have you guys.
Let's try to stay in touch, and if there's any way we can help in the future, I would love to be a part of that. We're 100% on board.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Harry Stewart, the chair and president of Welcome Friend Association and the founder of Rainbow Camp. We know it's not much, but especially as our Patreon base grows, we want to make sure we're using some of that money that we get from Patreon to give back. So we will be setting the example and making a donation at helprainbowcamp.com later on today, and I really hope that you will consider making one as well.
That interview, I think, was so cool because it shows the positive change that's happening right before our very eyes, in spite of all of the negative things that have been happening, right? And it's not just Rainbow Camp. We're seeing more LGBTQ-friendly camps pop up all over the place, and I think that's just awesome. I didn't have that kind of stuff when I was a kid. It just didn't exist. You went to church camp, and they're not exactly the most welcoming. Up next from episode 66 is another personal friend of mine, Brandon Taylor. And Brandon talks about his experience as growing up gay and black in America.
This is going to be a segment about coming out. We're going to allow listeners to share their stories about coming out as an LGBTQ identity and how those hard conversations happened, what helped you get through them, what was that monster in your mind, things that you might have heard when you were a child that made it harder for you to come out. And we're going to start with a good personal friend, Brandon. Brandon, welcome to SarahTalk.
Thank you, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, I mean, it's hot outside.
Yes.
And I don't do hot outside.
You're here in Florida as well, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we're talking today about coming out. What coming out story do you have to tell?
Does it involve outside?
Well, I mean, well, I'm not coming outside. And just yesterday, I came out of my work pants. It was very monumental.
Oh, whoa. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that your goal in life,
really
is to get the bell?
I was really hoping for that.
Really early in the show, too.
Yeah.
I make them all ring for me. I don't know. So I guess in terms of coming out, for me, being black and gay is one of those two things. It's like oil and water. It's not really supposed to mix. And the way that my parents raised me was more so be who you are and fuck everybody else.
Oh.
So it was almost like a catch-22 because it's like, well, are they still going to love me? Or is it going to be a real issue? Because I was raised Southern Baptist. So being gay is one of those things that you got sent to the fiery pits of hell for.
Right.
Among all of the other things. Molesting little boys was not one of them, but being gay was one of them. So
isn't that crazy?
God is very busy. He's got things to pick and choose.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, you could probably go to hell for your emails too, but that's also a different subject. The first person that I came out to was my dad. And just like a little premise on my parents, they were a lot older than everyone's parents. My dad was born in 1928.
Oh, okay.
So wow. I was the child born later in life. I was the happy surprise. I was the third tries the charm. And I mean, I am the youngest of three, and let's face it, I'm the best. So there you go.
Oh, the youngest is always the best. I'm the youngest too.
Exactly.
We all can just go to hell.
No wonder we get along so well.
Exactly. So with my dad, it was more of, my dad has always been black and white. Don't sugarcoat it. Just tell me what it is. So me and all of the lack of class that I have. One day he's in the kitchen just making a sandwich, and I just came out with it. I said, "Dad, I'm gay." And then it's like, after you have that moment, you're kind of sitting there and it's like you replay your entire childhood because you're like, oh God, now what's he going to think? Oh God, we're about to have this big dramatic moment. Maybe he's going to kick me out. Maybe there's going to be yelling. Maybe there's going to be screaming. And this jackass just says, okay.
Now, can I ask you what led up to this? Like, what brought you to that moment to say, I need to do this. I need to tell my dad?
It was at the point I was 17 years old and we were getting ready for high school graduation. And I knew that the minute I got out of there, I was going to be the gayest MFer known to mankind. I knew that whatever secret that I thought I was hiding, and when I say I thought I was hiding, it was not hid very well.
Mm-hmm.
Sidebar, have you succeeded in that?
I have succeeded very well.
Good for you, honey.
It was one of those things where my parents and we really never kept secrets from each other. So I was really angry with myself about it for a while, just because, your parents always tell you can tell me anything. And I feel like that's always like a bait and trap, because it's like, I know you're doing something and I want to know what it is. So you can tell me anything and I'll just kill you later. It was one of those things where I felt like, well, I got nothing to lose. I'm going off to college. They're either going to love me or they're not.
Now, were you funding your own college, or were you relying on them to help pay for some of that?
No, it was all me.
All right. I know a lot of people are in that position where, mom and dad are paying for some or all of college. And we hear from teenagers all the time that are like, I want to come out. Can I? Should I? Well, if you you think like your parents are going to cut off that support, maybe now's not the best time. But
I completely agree with that.
You didn't have that, so that's good.
Well, I felt like the only thing I had to lose was a place to come back to after school was over.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad, in his old Southern Baptist ways, he would always tell me, "To thyself be true. To thyself be true." Like I have no idea where in the Bible that's found. I'm not even going to lie to you and tell you that I read it enough now to know where it is. But that meant so much to me at the time. I'm like, well, okay, I can't lie to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have no reason to lie to them. They know the child that they raised. And I think anybody that meets me pretty much knows this is it.
Yep.
You can either like it or don't, but my biggest fan looks at me every morning in the mirror and says, "Damn, you're beautiful." So I really don't need anybody else's approval.
Yeah.
And so in that moment when he just said, "Okay," I kind of froze because I didn't know what to think. I was waiting for, "Okay, get out."
Right.
Or, "Okay, I don't approve." And then, I asked him, I said, "Okay." He says, "Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell me?" And I had nothing.
Now, for how long had you played out these scenarios in your mind? Like years, I'm assuming?
Oh my gosh, we're talking from like age 12.
Yeah.
Wow.
Age 12 all the way up. I was like, well, how do I do this? What do I say? My dad is from a small town in Georgia that no one really knows unless you live in the area. The fire station is next to the police station, which is next to the post office, and they all sit on one street. The courthouse is across the street from them. So I'm like, what do I say to this person who pretty much, when I say gay, has no idea what I'm talking about? And to him, it was okay. And when I kept prying, because okay just wasn't enough for me. Like I'm waiting for some pivotal moment in my life where Whitney Houston is playing in the background, and this is the turning point in my life where everything is either going to go to shit before it gets better, or I'm going to hit the lottery in the next 20 minutes and my life is going to be amazing. And he goes, "I really don't care what you do. You're my kid, and I love you."
Oh, that's so great.
And then he finished with, "Now, can I eat my sandwich in peace?" So,
I mean, of course he did.
Yeah.
I mean, there was that.
How dare you interrupt him eating his sandwich?
Shut up, you're interrupting my lunch, kid. Go away.
How dare you interrupt my meal with your gayness? No one cares about your gayness. Be gay, let me eat.
Oh my gosh.
And for me, it was weird because, I have friends that have come out to their parents and it completely changed their lives.
Mm-hmm.
They instantly found themselves homeless.
Yeah.
They instantly found themselves being ignored or pushed further back in the closet. So for my dad to look at me and just say, "Okay," as if I had told him it's going to rain today. At the time, I was almost angry about it because I'm like, well, maybe he's not taking me seriously.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not gay enough for him. Maybe I need to gay it up so he can understand what I'm talking about. And as I got older, I just realized, like, my dad at that point was like 65, 66. He had literally gotten to a point where he's just like, "Look, whatever expectations I had for you, that's my own issue. You are who you are."
Yep.
And I'm so glad that I came out to him when I did, because the very next year he ended up dying.
Oh my God.
Well, I mean, again, my dad was from that time where smoking was like a thing that everybody did. So he ended up passing to lung cancer. And I remember being there the last few moments before we just decided that it was time. And he couldn't speak. He just kept smiling at me. And my dad was a man of very few words. Unless you got between him and the TV, he was a man of very few words. So it was one of those things where I was like, we're on good terms. Yeah. We're good. The biggest thing for me as a kid, and I think any kid that's born into any type of strict religion, is I want my parents to be proud of me. Mm-hmm. I want my parents to be very proud of me. I want them to love me. I want them to adore everything that I do. And ever since I had come to realize that I think I like boys a little bit more than I really think I like boys, that had become my mission in life. I was determined. I was like, my dad is going to love me. I'm going to be his favorite kid. I became a Boy Scout. I played soccer. I played baseball, all things of which I'm not interested in.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but I was determined for my dad to love me. Like, it was going to happen. He didn't have to say in the matter. It was going to happen. And I mean, in high school, that slowly just started to break down. And I'm pretty sure he noticed it, which is why his response was just, okay. I mean, my kid's in the choir. My kid sings opera. How many black kids from New Jersey do you know say, I sing opera?
Yeah,
like,
right?
It's not a thing. It's not a thing. I play the flute and the piano. That's not a thing. I'm on the cheerleading team. Not a thing. So I wouldn't want to insult his intelligence and be like, well, I wonder how he knew.
Right.
Because, again, it was the best kept secret that only I didn't know. Everybody else knew. I didn't know. So he took it really well. My mom, on the other hand, she didn't take it as well as he did. My mom, again, she was born in like the early 1930s in a small town in South Carolina. And from the few times that I visited said town in South Carolina, there's always this sense of, I feel absolutely gross being here.
Wow.
Like, there's just no love in the air. When I came out to her, it was actually a few years later, which to anyone that knows me is weird because my mom and I are like coffee and cream. We are like your typical blaxploitation 70s tag team. And for me to not tell her something, which again, she probably already knew, was just bizarre. And I remember I was dating a long-standing boyfriend at the time, and he was planning on proposing to me. And I couldn't not have my mother there. Like, that's just not a thing that I was willing to do. So I sat her down one day, and I had to sit her down because if you know ethnic mothers like I know ethnic mothers,
I can see
their
it now.
wingspan.
Yeah.
Their wingspan when in attack mode is like deadly. So I had to sit her down and kind of stand by the door. And as I slowly explained it to her, my mom, who I am a spitting image of, she just cut me off and she said, "Is this you coming out?"
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, well, what I mean to say is, and she says, well, if you're going to come out, then come out. She's like, don't bullshit me and don't beat around the corner.
Wow.
Okay, well,
then yeah.
This is me coming out. And her very next response is, not in my house, you're not. Oh.
Oh my God.
Oh. Okay. Well, that's not the answer that I was hoping for. Another okay, but that's not what I got. And it kind of like right then and there just put up a wall.
Yeah. I guess.
And I learned very quickly the Buddhist law of detachment. My parents told me to never bend or pretend to be something that I'm not for anyone. And it's like, in that instance, you then have to decide, so do I want to be a part of this family or do I not want to be a part of this family?
Yeah.
There's no in between. And at that moment, I think she chose her words very quickly. I don't think that was what she intended to say. For the rest of the day, there was absolute silence between us. There was no talking. I'm not the type to try and reason with anybody. In my mind, it was, well, I need to find some place to go when college is over.
Right.
In her mind, it was, that's the end of the conversation. He's going to think about this. It'll fix itself. And we're all going to move along. And I think after enough time passed and the things that I used to do and the things that she used to do kind of stopped, that was when I think I'd called her for some reason. I don't remember what the reason was. And the first thing she says to me is not hi or hello or how are you? She says, are you going to come home in a dress?
Oh.
Whoa.
And I was like, no, I never intended to come home in a dress. I mean, I got a great pair of legs. I've never intended to come home in a dress. And she says, well, I just don't understand. What are you not understanding? I don't know what you mean when you say you're gay. Well, how can I clarify? I like penises and I have one. Which is not something I would say to my mother because I always have this irrational fear that she could reach through the phone and choke me. So
it's probably a good fear.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a thing. Like, I know it's not gonna happen, but I believe that if she really needed to, it could happen.
Mm-hmm. But to come right out and say, I don't understand, what does that mean? Like, there's a willingness to learn there that you don't always see.
And that's what scared me. It's easier when people reject you because you can just say, well, fuck them, they're assholes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But when someone's willing to learn, you then adopt this responsibility of, oh God, now I have to teach them.
Yeah.
And I'm not just teaching them for me, I'm teaching them for everyone that they encounter that's like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it took a few uncomfortable months. I won't lie. It really did take a few uncomfortable months. But we got to a point where I was her son. She didn't care. It was no longer her concern. I was just her son. I brought boyfriends to meet her.
Oh, wow.
And that was always my rule. If my mom didn't like you, then we're not going to date. It's just a thing.
Mm.
I'm a mama's boy. So if I don't think my mom's going to like you, we're not going to date. It's just the thing.
Yeah.
I had to introduce her to friends slowly just because, again, my mom was willing to be open about it and accept who I am, accept the environment that I choose to place myself in. And I would never want to be that kid that goes, well, my parents accept me, so I'm just going to completely culture shock them. Because for me, coming out, culture was a very big part of it. My parents never in their wildest dreams envisioned that they were going to have a black male son grow up in a world that is like it is now.
Yeah.
To compound that problem and then be gay, that's something they don't know how to handle or fix. To be black in America, my parents knew very well. That was something they knew how to guide me through. To be black and gay in America, that's frightening for them. They have no idea what to do with that.
Right.
Parents grow up with this expectation of what their kids are going to be like. And I personally am not a parent unless you count animals. Then yes, I am an animal parent. And it's always, I've always thought of it as a haphazard thing because you always have this idea of how your child is going to be. When your child doesn't meet that expectation, there's almost a sense of disappointment that you knew was coming. And for Black parents, and my heart goes out to every person of color that's sitting in the closet. You don't even have to be a person of color, just anybody sitting in the closet.
Yeah.
It's scary when you know your parents already struggle to figure out how you're going to make it. I mean, my parents taught me from day one how to deal with police officers, how to act in the presence of when you're the only Black person in the room. And I mean, Sarah, we've worked together. You've seen often I am usually the only Black person in the room.
Yeah.
Like, we're trained from day one. And it's sad because it makes you think of the 1960s where parents had to train their children.
Right.
How to deal with people that are following them, people that are harassing them. Those are things that maybe not in the same tone, but in the same spirit, I grew up learning. So for my parents to then be presented with something they know nothing about, nothing that they know sufficiently about, it can be jarring to anybody. Because at the end of the day, and I don't care what any parent says, that's their kid. They fear for their child. And fear is a massive part of the Black community, whether anybody wants to admit it or not.
Yep.
I mean, down from the point where we were imported to America, because everybody says we're all illegal aliens. I am an import. I was Amazon.com, so not an illegal alien.
Did you get free shipping with Prime? That's the.
Let's face it, white America got everything for free.
Sure. Well, and that's something that you and I were texting about.
Smallpox, but that's a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, but that's a thing. That's a thing that you and I were texting about in the middle of the night when we were kind of discussing this show.
Right.
You know, as someone who recognizes their own white privilege, while I had the monster in my mind about coming out for a long time to my own parents, my parents, we grew up in a really small town, very rural, kind of like what you've described, farming community in the Midwest. And I don't know that they really ever worried for me to worry about what my life would be like, right? because I had that privilege. I had the privilege of being somewhere in the middle class. I got a decent education. I had all the opportunities. I made 3 attempts at college, and you know, a lot of kids don't even get that. And so, you know, there's that privilege piece that comes with it. And what you're talking about of the in the Black community, where already from conception, your parents are worried about how you're going to navigate through life, and they're not even thinking about, oh, what if he's gay? You know, just that to me really opened my eyes, that compounding worry, I guess.
I mean, and it's like I always go back to the beginning. When slaves were freed, there was no manual on how to raise your child. It was, you're free, figure it out. And what people fail to realize is a lot of things that happen in the Black community, it's what they knew. People swear that corporal punishment is a bad thing, but that's what they knew. That's how they knew how to keep their children in line. It's what they knew. Black families were never made from the beginning, from the inception of slavery. Black families were never made to stay together. That's something that Black families had to learn over time. That's new. And I know it's a big joke and it's a big stereotype. Whenever there's a Black family, you won't see the father. But that's something that we're still learning today. Like, that's new. It's only been 300 years. It takes a lot longer to evolve.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, you need to come back on, and look, we're going to do a whole episode with Brandon. That's the plan.
I can do that.
Because we have so much more to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I can talk.
All right. Well, we'll schedule something something with you for a full episode coming up soon.
Well, thank you, ladies.
Absolutely. Brandon, I appreciate you joining the conversation today, and we'll definitely...
Thank you for having me.
We'll be in touch and get something scheduled.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
Ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Again, Brandon Taylor. Brandon, we love you. And thank you so much for exposing your sides and opening up for our audience. The final segment is probably one of the more controversial intellectual conversations that we had on the show this year. This is Georgianne Chapin, the executive director of Intact America. And as you'll hear as we go throughout the interview here, I do still carry a lot of guilt associated with having my own son circumcised. And so we work through some of that. We talk about the social, cultural position on circumcision, how it's completely unnecessary. She refutes all of the bad arguments that people make in favor of circumcision. And I came away feeling a little more guilty for having done this to my son. But it's going to open up new conversations with in my own family and hopefully with some of my friends. If I can prevent further suffering of baby boys with this fucking awful procedure, then I'm that's what I'm going to do. So this is the final segment of this year's Indian Review interviews selected by our listeners. Georgianne Chapin.
This is a topic that I've been wanting to tackle for a long time now, and I've said this on the show before. One of the major regrets that I have in my life is having my son circumcised. And I've developed some pretty strong opinions on this, and I know that there are a lot of people on the other side with strong opinions too. So being a show that tries to, look at the facts and do the research and present the evidence, I wanted to do that and see what the medical community really has to say about it. So today we are joined by Georgianne Chapin, the executive director of Intact America. Georgianne, welcome to SarahTalk.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. So first, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your own background?
Sure. I'll start with my demographic information. I'm a 65-year-old woman. I'm a mother of one grown son. He is 36 and he is an intact man, which means that for many, many decades, I've been opposed to cutting off body parts from people who cannot consent to it.
Yeah.
So that's been really my belief for as long as I can remember, and I don't really know exactly why I came to that, given that so many other people accepted circumcision as normal. And then over the years, I just became more interested in why we do this to boys when we are so appalled at having it done to girls. And I also became much more aware of the long-term damage and the long-term effects of being deprived of this body part when you're a baby, and the long-term benefits of keeping the body that you want, that you're entitled to, right?
Yeah.
People should be able to make their own decisions. So when I was, and I'm a lawyer, although I never practiced law. I was a healthcare executive for many years. Actually, still am. Run a small nonprofit healthcare company. Mm-hmm. And everything I've, done and believed in my life has just continued to reinforce my feeling that this is a terrible human rights violation and something we have no right to do to somebody else. That's really, that's where I come from. That's where Intact America comes from. Intact America, which is on the web and on Facebook.
Yeah. Now, when we had our son 7 years ago, we hadn't really discussed circumcision in a lot of great detail ahead of time. And then a nurse shows up and says, "Are you going to do this?" And you're just kind of left on your own to decide. I would have loved to have someone in the medical background and no religious bias there to talk through this whole thing with us. I mean, they provide very detailed breastfeeding support now. I feel like we could just do a better job, about educating parents about circumcision, which is kind of the point of this episode. So I want to get to the damage that happens to kids during circumcision in just a moment. But first, let's walk through a couple of the common arguments, particularly the myths that are offered up in support of circumcision, if you don't mind. So,
no, not at all.
The first one, we shared one of the memes that you sent over. We shared on our Instagram, and one of our followers commented, quote, "It helps reduce the risk of certain STIs, helps prevent penile cancer, and also prevents the incredibly painful swelling of the foreskin," end quote. And I was aware of the prominent idea that uncut penises are harder to keep clean and then would cause more infections. I've heard of before. But the cancer and swelling thing was new for me. So I'll kind of let you get all of that.
Right. I mean, and what was the first one? Oh, STI.
Yeah.
No evidence, actually. Absolutely no evidence that a foreskin is associated in any way, positively or negatively, with the acquisition of sexually transmitted infections. That's simply unproven. There are studies that show some advantage to having a foreskin, and some studies that show no advantage to having foreskin. But there's absolutely no convincing epidemiological evidence associating the presence of a foreskin with increased STIs. Penile cancer is one that's been trotted out for decades, and penile cancer is one of the rarest cancers among human beings. Occurs almost exclusively in very old men. It can occur whether you have a foreskin or not. It occurs in another part of the penis. And the American Cancer Society very explicitly says that circumcision should not be practiced as a way of preventing penile cancer. Penile cancer is a fraction less, way, 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 way less common, for example, than breast cancer, and we don't go cutting off women's breasts routinely to prevent breast cancer.
Right.
The swelling of the foreskin's funny. That's kind of funny if it wasn't so ridiculous to think that people would follow that. But any body parts that you have can get infected or damaged and can be incredibly painful, right? I mean, ingrown toenails, incredibly painful, like horrible, right?
Yeah.
Well, we don't go cutting off people's big toes to prevent the incredibly painful swelling and infection of their big toes. Appendicitis is incredibly painful and dangerous, but we don't, routinely remove people's appendixes. So that's kind of funny because it really falls into the whole paradigm of this is a bad body part and we really ought to get rid of it sooner rather than later. And of course, there's no such thing as a bad body part. I mean, the body is has evolved over millions of years. All mammals have foreskins, male and female. mammals have foreskins. In people, the female foreskin is generally called the clitoral hood, and it's there for a reason. And in boys, the foreskin is boys and men, the foreskin serves in early life a very strong protective function, keeping pathogens from getting into the urinary tract. And in adults, it serves an incredibly important procreative function in that it enhances pleasure for both partners.
Which is generally the reason why religion wants to get rid of things, is to control your sexual.
Yeah, that is definitely a very big part of the history of male circumcision and female genital cutting in America. We have a very obscure and hidden history of female genital mutilation in this country. Kind of went by the wayside in the 1970s and 80s, but it was not unheard of for doctors to remove American girls' clitorises, usually as a result of their parents complaining about them masturbating.
Wow.
Yeah, so we just don't, we've completely obliterated that part of our medical history. I wanted to, if it's okay, Sarah, at all, I just wanted to address directly your introduction, which is to get, medical information and talk to a medical expert. Circumcision is not a medical procedure. We should just dispense with that. The fact that a doctor does something does not make it a clinically valid medical procedure, right?
That is a fantastic point. Yes.
Yeah. Don't forget that circumcision is carried out among religions all over the world by ritual practitioners. Oh, yeah. Actually, in the U.S. also, you don't have to be a licensed health professional to do circumcision. The line is actually quite blurry because you can bring some dude into your house who has a religious background to cut off your son's foreskin, but you can't cut your son's foreskin off yourself.
Right.
Right? You're not allowed to do that. And in fact, people have been arrested for trying that, usually when it's botched, of course, right? But it's not a valid medical procedure. It's simply something that crept into fee-for-service medicine, any more than ear piercing is, right? People, when I had my ears pierced at the age of, I don't know, I was a teenager, my parents were very concerned about infection and getting it done right. And I remember going to the doctor and having him kind of with this, I don't want to say despairing look, but this sort of kind of, what the heck am I doing this for? Like, this is not what I was trained to do, pierce this kid's ears. There was no discussion about whether I was of an age to do it or whatever. But, just the fact that a doctor does something doesn't mean it's medical. And then what happens is once something has become the purview of the medical profession, like it did in the U.S., then it becomes up to the medical profession to continue to justify it. Because after all, they're doing it, they're charging for it, right? Yeah. And they got to justify it somehow. But it's not a valid medical procedure.
Yeah.
It is the removal of a totally normal, totally healthy body part from somebody who is completely vulnerable because of his size and inability to resist other than by screaming. That doesn't make medicine.
We've talked on the show before too about, and particularly in New York, there is a problem that's becoming rampant more and more with the Orthodox rabbis who are passing on. If you're worried about STIs, you need to worry about these Orthodox rabbis who are passing on infections to these young boys, because in this Orthodox tradition, once the foreskin is cut, then they put it in their mouth.
They suck the penis to stop the blood
and
flow.
And if anybody else did that, we would lock them up, by the way.
Yeah, that is true. So yes, and actually it's interesting because 100 years ago there was in New York also, which is where the ultra-Orthodox population that does this is mostly located. 100 years ago it was syphilis that before we had a cure for syphilis, and there was actually quite a lot of syphilis in the adult population, and the rabbis, the moyals, were passing on syphilis this way to babies by the mouth to penis contact. These days it's herpes.
Yep.
Because syphilis is very low incidence. So it's herpes, and herpes can be fatal. A herpes infection that is annoying and an inconvenience in an adult can be fatal or cause blindness to infants. So yeah, there's that. You're right. There's that.
Then there are some arguments that don't even try to be medically based, like, you know, some fathers that say things like, "It'll be weird if it doesn't look like mine."
Right.
Or that he won't look like his friends, or he'll be
I always say to
teased.
that, well, you have brown eyes and your son has green eyes. You're going to give him back?
Yeah.
You know, who are you going to give him? Yeah. I mean, our kids don't look like us, especially. I mean, I couldn't tell you what my mother's genitals look like and whether I look like her. And it's just, that's absurd also. Let me just, go back to the hygiene thing, because you did mention that. That's also, you know, of course, a total myth that's
hard to keep clean.
For one thing, in an infant, it's much harder to clean a newly circumcised penis because you have a wound.
Yes.
So in addition to all the other things you have to do with a newborn, and you know this, you have a son who's what, 8, you say?
Yeah, he's 7 now, yeah.
7, right. So, you know, having a baby is, you know, lots of work. There's a lot of stuff to do, and to have to do wound care for a newborn is insane, right?
Yep.
So that hygiene argument is another kind of reflex rhetorical point that people make, because nobody's going to answer you back, well, I don't care if my kid's dirty. You know, instead they're going to say, oh yeah, you know, easier to keep clean. It's easier to keep an intact penis clean than a baby. And I always say, you know, if you can teach your kid to, you know, clean his ears, brush his teeth, blow his nose,
right, wipe his butt,
become a wipe his butt, become a scientist,
right.
You know, become an airplane pilot. You can teach him to wash his penis, especially since, you know, having a foreskin and pulling it back to do whatever feels really good. You know, so most boys really don't have any trouble figuring out how to rinse off their penis in the shower. You know, once that foreskin becomes retractable, and up until that time, I mean, that is the self-pleasuring that males routinely engage in,
Mm-hmm.
and so it really isn't. You know, that again, that's the myth, is that it's somehow cleaner.
Sure.
Of course, if we talk about anybody's genitals, I mean, women's genitals have lots of folds, and
we have an infant daughter too. We've got both sides of that. Yeah.
Right. And you know, and that argument, by the way, is one of the arguments that's used in the parts of the world where female genital mutilation is practiced, that it's cleaner, that it's more, and the word for cutting girls' genitals is or for the ceremony and for the process is the Arab word for purity.
Oh.
So it's a purification ritual. And that's essentially how we treat circumcision in the U.S. We just don't use that word. We use hygiene, which is, you know, is somehow a more scientific sounding word than purification, but it's exactly the same principle.
Now, my own thoughts have evolved over the past 7 years. And again, this is something that you talk about in some of the informational resources on your website, intactamerica.org. And that's this. I realize it's a dangerous and painful procedure. I realize we've only been doing it for so long because God. I realize it wrongly gets portrayed as normal, especially in America. But the one thing I think that really changed me on this, and we touched on this earlier, that my son was unable to give consent to a major elective surgery, basically. It wasn't like he needed a hole in his heart repaired. This was absolutely an elective thing, and he had no choice in the matter. And that's probably where most of my guilt comes from, I think.
Right, yeah. And then he has to live with the consequences forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I have, you know, over the years since as I said, I always thought this was an issue, and I talked to lots of people over, you know, my lifetime. But since I started Intact America, by the way, together with a group of other people who've been working on this issue. I didn't do this single-handedly at all. We have a huge movement right now. But since I started Intact America, I've probably spoken to thousands of people about the effects of circumcision. I was going to say men, but I've also talked to their partners, and to their children and to their parents about the terrible regret and trauma that this causes to families and to couples and to parents and children. And it's so sad because it's so unnecessary. Right now, there's a couple from Florida who I'm in contact with a lot, and they have started to speak out. They have an 18-month-old son, and the father was thought he should be circumcised. So, and the mother didn't want that to happen, and a doctor chipped in with his opinion that it wouldn't hurt a bit and it would be better. So they went ahead with it, and it caused a tremendous breakdown in their marriage, and they're struggling to keep their marriage together. And then, of course, the really terrible thing is, one of the terrible things is, they're worried about their son. They're worried about explaining to him, because if you don't know anything, then you're probably not worried about explaining it. But once you've become aware, then this is something you're going to need to deal with. But then the father is also dealing with his own guilt about his son. He's dealing with having betrayed his wife by not listening to her, and he's dealing with his own circumcision grief. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, his wife, who is sympathetic to him, is also furious at him, and really doesn't have any room for dealing with his grief. And then her associated grief at realizing that he's not complete. So it's just this cascading series of realizations, and this is all, Sarah, apart from the physical, right?
Yeah.
Because this child, this 18-month-old, is a happy baby. Mm-hmm. One can hope that he will, grow up to be a happy, functional in every way, boy and man. So there's nothing. I mean, he did not lose more than his foreskin in the surgery, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of an ordinary circumcision. He's not botched. So when they went to consider legal action against the physician for having really misled them, right? The lawyers wouldn't even consider it because the child's, not botched.
Wow.
Except that he is, because he's missing his foreskin, right? So all of this, is just preliminary. This is, and so unnecessary, right? Mm-hmm. If we just left our babies with their healthy, normal bodies, instead of being compelled to chop off some part of it, we wouldn't have to worry about any of this. Then they'd just be fighting about what everybody else fights about, whether it's money or religion or whether to move or remodel or something. But instead, there's this horrible thing that happened, and both parents, immense grief and fear for the future of their child. And then this man's, dealing with his own feelings of betrayal and his own injury and his own worry about, his own sexual function and what it means for him over time. Mm-hmm. So it's just...
Now, we may need a content warning on this next bit, but I think it's important for people to know what kind of harm there actually is in these routine circumcisions. And before we get into this, your group was kind enough to send over some photos to me of babies strapped into this circumstraint.
Oh, God.
And it's actually, I'm not going to show you all of them, guys. There are basically a step-by-step of the procedure, right? So I picked out some of the lesser ones for you to, right? So you've got the baby strapped in here strapped down to this board so they can't move their hands and legs.
As the circumstraint company advertises, a 4-point restraint with gentle Velcro straps. So 4-point restraint, of course, what we brag about using on prisoners, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and let me just mention to you, Sarah, that there are lots and lots and lots of videos online of circumcisions, and I, who after decades of thinking about this, I cannot watch them. I just finally came to terms with the fact that I will never watch a circumcision video ever again.
I don't think I could. Nope. I'm glad they didn't take me back.
Right.
Right. But parents who are going to circumcise their sons, who've made a decision to circumcise, should be asked to watch video before they.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, then if they refuse to do that, that should tell them something. If you can't watch the video, I mean, and then somebody said, well, you wouldn't watch a video of open heart surgery if you're going to have open heart surgery. Well, one thing is maybe you would, but you presumably need open heart surgery, right?
Yeah.
So watch the video or don't watch the video, but this is a medical procedure. Again, circumcision is not a medical procedure. It's just torture.
What are some of the things that can happen? I think I read a story on the website about a baby who screamed so hard he had a hernia.
Yeah.
What other kinds of things are common?
So if it's okay with you, I will describe what happens in a circumcision physically, and then some of the. All right. So again, as I mentioned earlier, or I think I mentioned earlier, the foreskin is attached to the head of the penis in an infant, with the same kind of tissue that our nails, our fingernails and toenails are attached to the nail bed. It's called synechial tissue. And in order to be able to circumcise a baby, to cut off his foreskin, the first thing that you need to do is detach that foreskin from the head of the penis. And that is done with a metal probe that's inserted exactly as though you were detaching a fingernail from a nail bed. Exactly.
Becca's headphones are off already. Yeah.
Okay, so a metal probe is inserted and rammed under the foreskin and then basically sawed around the entire circumference of the penis between the foreskin and the glans. The glans is the kind of acorn-looking head of the penis, of the denuded penis, right? Mm-hmm. And that causes as much pain as it would if somebody was detaching your fingernail from the nail bed in a newborn, in somebody who's been only on this earth for a few days, maybe in some cases even only a few hours. And there is no anesthetic that can safely be given to a baby that will block all the pain. And in fact, for many decades, circumcision was carried out with absolutely no anesthetic.
Oh,
now, a lot of doctors and hospitals are using sugar, glucose pacifier, which, imagine going to the podiatrist for an ingrown toenail again and having them give you a Tootsie Roll Pop for pain. Or Emla cream, which is a topical which does not block all the nerve sensation. It takes a long time to take effect, and a lot of hospitals won't use it because it takes too long. Or an injection into the base of the penis, 3 injections actually, which is a block, a penile block. Also not 100% effective, although probably the most effective, but again, involving 3 unanesthetized injections into the base of the penis, and all, of course, totally unnecessary. So the first step of the procedure is to detach the foreskin from the glands. And then usually a clamp is put onto the foreskin to keep it from bleeding, and then some other kind of severing clamp is used. There are several of them. One is called a Gomco clamp. There's another one called a Mogan clamp, which has been implicated in many, many circumcision injuries. And then there's something called a Plastibell, which can be put on your son's penis, and he's sent home with it and it falls off in a week or two. Now, this is just what this newborn baby needs, right? So, and they basically all result in the severing of the foreskin. So, what can go wrong? You're operating on a very tiny body part. And just as no 2 adult penises are the same, no 2 baby penises are the same. And most of the doctors who do circumcisions are not trained penis specialists. They are often OBGYNs. And there's a medical school joke, which is watch one, do one, teach one.
Whoa.
So, right. So you should know, parents who are thinking about doing this should know that there are very few. Probably, we talked earlier, probably a trained mohel, a Jewish circumciser has actually more training, in circumcision than a doctor does. So too much tissue can be taken off, too much foreskin, which results in very, very tight erections. Sometimes so much foreskin is removed because the foreskin is just part of the penis. It's not this separate thing that has a little red dotted line that says trim here, right? So if you pull down too much foreskin into the clamp, then the boy, when he starts to get sexually mature, you've actually pulled down scrotal tissue. So and you wouldn't know that in a newborn, but then the person will have hair on the shaft of his penis, which is very painful during intercourse for both partners. You could have the man could have very tight, painful erections, bent penis. The most common circumcision complication that's extraordinarily rare in an intact male is meatal stenosis, which is the blood flow to the tip of the penis is interrupted, so it becomes stenosed, it becomes narrow, and it can result in inability to urinate, or boys or men who urinate in a split stream and don't know why. That's always meatal stenosis, which has caused the urinary opening to close up in part. Then, of course, all of these are all in the realm of normal circumcision complications.
Wow.
Then there are not infrequent terrible bleeding. Again, you're operating on a newborn. There could be a bleeding disorder, or because nobody knows what the blood supply to any individual baby's penis is like. You can hit a major vessel instead of a minor vessel, and the mother takes the baby home, and the diaper is completely full of blood, and just a couple of teaspoons of blood loss in an infant can cause shock and death. That's the biggest cause of circumcision-related deaths, would be bleeding. And people are extremely unaware of that, and often these cases, parents will have contacted the doctor or the hospital and been told not to worry. That little bleeding is normal, but little bleeding in an adult's not the same as little bleeding in a baby. Then you can have severing the glands of the penis, all or part of it, or more of the penis, and this is something that is more common when a Mogen clamp is used. And Mogen's actually, one of the manufacturers of Mogen clamp went out of business because of lawsuits. Yet they continue to make them, different manufacturers, and continue to use them despite the fact that there have been so many reported injuries. So those are just some of the things that can immediately go wrong. Then, of course, there are long-term complications, like I mentioned. Well, actually, I did mention some of the long-term complications, like hair on the shaft of the penis and painful bent erections, chafing. And then the consequence, the normal circumcised penis and a normal, perfectly executed circumcision always results in a scar and always results in the eventual keratinization of the head of the penis, because the foreskin keeps the head of the penis soft and moist and pliable. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so if you remove that, the constant abrasion on the clothing of a boy and then a man results in desensitization, basically callousing, right?
Wow.
On the head of the penis. So there's very little research, but I think there will be more in the future. That is, to me, doubtless one of the causes of sexual dysfunction among adults.
Interesting.
And increasing complaints of dryness and performance issues in older couples. The man often is blamed for, banging and excessive, kind of activity in order to have an orgasm. And we just don't hear that among partners of intact men. There are other reasons for it, I'm sure, personal and psychological, but very compelling evidence that it's because normal sensitivity is not there. And so men have to work much, much harder just to feel something and reach an orgasm.
Wow. Yeah.
And, we haven't done cross-cultural studies on, and sexual, as you certainly know, sex research is very complex, right?
Yeah.
And very subjective. But the use of artificial lubricants in sex is off the charts in the U.S. compared to Europe, where men are not circumcised.
Wow.
And again, we don't know exactly why. It could have just to do, but it's generally. I would be very surprised if the main reason for this is not related to the fact that most American adult men are circumcised and most European adult men are not.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So you don't need most American men. It's my understanding. I shouldn't say that the use of lubricant is very common for masturbation in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard from European colleagues who work on this issue, who are aware of this issue, that is not true in Europe. And the use of lubricant for sex is also much more frequent and more common in the U.S. than in countries where men are not circumcised.
Right.
Again, we don't have objective data on why this is, but I think it's not a far stretch to say that removing the body part that protects the penis and keeps it moist
Mm-hmm.
and soft must have some, consequence.
Sure. And knowing how the foreskin moves during the actual action of intercourse, we don't have the studies, but it sounds like common sense to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, every body part is there. There's no, just like what are the parts of your body that guarantee perpetuation of the species, right? Because what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's your mouth and your genitals, right? You can live with no arms, no legs. You can live blind, right?
Yeah.
But you have to ingest food and you have to be able to procreate, right? So, to mess with the genitals is really kind of astonishing, right? To think that somehow they were badly designed, so that half of all babies are born needing correction. Now, people do, dress up and, as you know, do lots of other things with their genitals once they're of an age to make a decision as to what makes them feel good, right?
Yes,
what turns them on, right? That's fine, but you can't be doing that to little babies.
Now,
you have to be aware that you're changing form and function and what the consequences of that is, and babies cannot make that decision.
Yes, absolutely. Now, part of the activism work that you do involves educating medical professionals, and we kind of mentioned this a little earlier, but my experience with the doctors and nurses, and this was so in the hospital, and Becca doesn't really remember a whole lot of this at all.
I had a C-section.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
But
it was really like the doctor came in and said, this is not a thing that we do here in the hospital. It's a you go to your doctor thing. Some people do it, some people don't. It's really basically your choice, and we can't tell you what to do. Right. What does I'm going to guess it's lacking or completely just not there at all. What does the law look like or hospital policy say about, you mentioned earlier the doctor that recommended, you should, it doesn't hurt, no big deal, let's do it. What does the law and hospital policy say about that?
It's really all over the place, but in essence, circumcision violates all kinds of bioethical rules and even hospital and medical rules when it comes to consent, because informed consent is supposed to be from the person who's going to live with the consequences of whatever the action is, except if the life or health of a child, for example, is at risk, or the life or health of somebody who cannot consent is at risk. And then you you can have a substitute decision maker. The weird thing about circumcision is that the life and health of the baby is not at stake. This is a purely cosmetic and cultural surgery, but it's so deeply embedded in American medicine that it's basically been given a pass over all these decades. So the hospital, I've seen hospital consent forms, you know, that for one thing, no one reads them, right?
Of course,
really
sure.
So, and the solution is not to develop a better consent form, because the parent should have no. The job of the parents is to protect their children's rights, right? Not just to protect their bodies, but to protect their children's rights, preserve their children's rights. So no amount of information on a consent form for a medically unnecessary procedure on a child is going to be valid. But I've seen consent forms that say, condition to be treated, and then it says presence of foreskin.
Oh my God!
Right? Yeah. So again, this is something that it's something that you cannot sum up in any few sentences. What the rules are in different hospitals, even who does it, what people are told. But the point is, nobody should be selling a circumcision. Nobody should be saying, if no one had come up to you and said, "Now, do you want him circumcised?"
Right.
I mean, that's solicitation. That's like, you know, you walk into a store and they say, "Would you like to try our, you know, lip gloss or something?" They're selling, right? That's okay in a store. You can decide. But you know, they shouldn't be selling circumcisions, and they continue to. The other point is that most medical professionals are not educated about the foreskin. Most male doctors don't have one. They've been, now, although this is changing, right? Because, you know, younger men are they're more intact younger men, but most older male doctors don't have a foreskin. It was taken away from them when they were babies. And then if doctors have done circumcisions over the years, there's a lot of denial, you know, about the damage that it causes. Denial or just repression, right, of awareness. How can you do that to a baby and not hear the screams?
Right.
But, you know, in medicine, you're taught to turn off to the patient's distress in a lot of cases, because what you're doing is necessary for the patient. In this case, it's not necessary. And
I couldn't imagine being that doctor and then like having to go to sleep that night. I would hear those screams in my nightmares.
Right. One wonders if they do or don't, you know.
Yeah.
I've heard doctors and nurses say, "Oh, they sleep through the circumcision." I've heard, look, they used to do open heart surgery on babies with only curare to paralyze them, because they said babies didn't feel pain. Anyone who says that, you know, any mother or any parent, right? Any parent knows babies feel pain. I remember discovering that my son's onesie, that the zipper was all the way up at the top, and it was instead of the zipper pull being down, it was up, and it was poking into his neck. And he kept screaming and screaming. I couldn't figure it out. Finally, I saw it. He was a tiny baby, right? You're gonna tell me, you know? They say, "Oh, it doesn't cause pain. They just don't like being strapped down." Or people will say babies sleep through it, and of course, that is always the result of a child going into shock, screaming so hard, or just going into shock in some kind of dissociative state. Let me just mention, I'm doing a lot of talking.
No, please.
That there are there's lots of evidence now about the long-term negative impacts of circumcision. There's the physical stuff I talked about, the meatostenosis and the sexual dysfunction. But in the International Journal of Human Rights earlier this year, there was an article published written by Tim Hammond and Adrian Carmack. Adrian is a urologist, a medical doctor, urologist, about long-term adverse outcomes from neonatal circumcision. They did a survey of more than 1,000 men and talked to them about their feelings about having been circumcised, and both their physical and psychological consequences of having been circumcised. And if you read that, you know, it's just incredibly compelling evidence that this is not a benign procedure. Even if this were the only 1,000 men, right, who felt like this, the justification for a medically unnecessary surgery just is not there. And of course, there are millions of men who are becoming aware of this issue and saying, I've had men tell me, in some ways I wish I had never become aware, I wish I was still blissfully ignorant. But once they know, the consequences are really quite devastating. And then men have to work through that, or not, but whichever it is, right? So there is lots of material about, being published. There's another book published by a man from New Zealand. It's called Unspeakable Mutilations. And again, it's, 150 pages of anecdotes, and this would be a different, base of men who are talking about the impact of circumcision on their physical and emotional well-being and their relationships.
Just an aside, that's another one of those things that I think is maybe not uniquely American culturally, but we talk a lot about, picture that awkward conversation in the TGIF sitcom where the dad is having this awkward conversation with his son about the birds and the bees. And like we are repressed so much in just talking about our bodies and sexuality. This is just another, maybe a deeper kind of layer to that.
It is, because often, if that child has been circumcised, and then if the parent is really quite ignorant about it, you've got a conversation that's just fraught with emotional distress, right? And the ignorance also makes it so hard for people to even explain. And then on top of it is, I know there are a lot of men who I've talked to who said, when I first heard about circumcision, my thought was, I am so glad my parents would never do that to me. And then the immediate realization, oh my God, they did that to me. How did that happen? So yeah, just as doctors, are in denial about what they're doing to babies, parents understandably go into denial about the decision they made. Sarah, could we take just a second, because you kind of alluded to it and I kind of said, yeah, but what the history of medical circumcision is in America, because I think that's really helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll try to be really brief about it, but our founding fathers of America were all intact, and they seem to be just fine. So we can safely assume that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and and the Native Americans and and pretty much people all over the world, but certainly in American history, men were intact. In the mid 1800s, in the Victorian era, where lots of things happened. This was pre-Freud, and people started to be very concerned about sex and not just morality, but it was believed that masturbation and excessive sexual activity caused the human body to dissipate in its energy. So if anyone saw the movie The Road to Wellville, that was about Kellogg, the cereal guy, and his spa in, I believe it's in Michigan, where people, were encouraged to eat vegetarian and not masturbate, basically, and not have sex. So it was recognized that it was recognized that boys did a lot of masturbation and girls too, and it was thought that was very unhealthy, and that the solution for that was to remove the source of pleasure, and removing the foreskin would cause boys not to touch themselves anymore, not to masturbate. Well, of course, it doesn't work. Everybody pretty much masturbates.
Sure.
But foreskin removal in adolescence was promoted and that was like the kind of the original, that became like the moral hygiene argument, that it was kind of immoral to masturbate. And that was for adolescent boys and girls. And then over the next few years, they kind of started doing circumcisions earlier and earlier. And when obstetrics became a specialty and childbirth moved into the hospital, one of the things that doctors started to do as part of the tricks of their trade was to circumcise infants. Because if it's good to remove, the foreskin from teenagers, it's even better to remove it early when they can't run away from you, right? You can strap them down
and they get
do
the
this.
business.
And they get the business, and it made its way into fee-for-service medicine. This was not at Britain, of course, as a country with, Victorian tradition. I mean, that's really where it came from, was Queen Victoria, right? Also was circumcising, much as America was. But then by the Second World War, when it was really ramping up in the U.S., Britain adopted a national health service and made decisions not to cover medically unnecessary procedures. And there were a couple of very influential British physicians and a very famous midwife named Penelope Leach who had recognized at that point that circumcision was not medically necessary and that the foreskin had a positive function and a role. So Britain just gave up on it, and the U.S. just kept going with it. Other English-speaking countries followed the route of Britain. Australia, a little less. There's still some circumcision in Australia, but New Zealand gave it up. The Commonwealth countries. Canada is a little mixed, kind of follows American geography. So, but it basically went by the wayside in these other countries and persisted as part of fee-for-service medicine in the U.S. And then we taught the South Koreans and the Filipinos to do it too as part of our military occupation of those countries. So those countries and the U.S. are really the only countries where circumcision is part of routine, part of the childbirth routine.
That is so interesting.
Really?
Yeah. So people tell you that, it's that doctors do it, so it must be necessary. Of course, they don't realize that doctors started doing it as a way to keep boys from masturbating, not because, and then there were all these other justifications that followed, that it prevented hip dysplasia, it prevented blindness. Well, people used to think that masturbation caused blindness, right? So, sure, circumcision prevented blindness by preventing masturbation, right? Things that people would have no trouble identifying as totally ridiculous, but they're just not aware of the history.
Sure. Wow. Well, this is such an important topic. And God, if you can't change the doctors' minds, at least hopefully parents can get access to better education at a minimum. So, I'm really thankful.
That's what Intact America is aiming for.
Yeah.
We really are, not just parents, but the public in general, because parents listen also. They listen to their own parents. They listen to, they listen to popular culture. So we are really trying to reach to the mainstream so that we can achieve that tipping point so that it becomes, unpopular to circumcise your baby, so that people realize it's just, not only is it not necessary, it's not desirable, it's not cool. And that is what Intact America, we are trying to change the way America thinks about circumcision. And I think we're being very successful, actually. I think we're going to reach a tipping point. And I doubt circumcision will ever be outlawed in this country for various reasons, including its religious.
Yep.
But I think that we will reach the point where parents of newborns will say, no, I'm not doing that. And that can't happen soon enough. I mean, we just need to make that happen.
Absolutely. And, I have long been a proponent of things like, refuting bad science. Crystals don't have healing powers. Vaccines don't cause autism. And so this is probably the newest one on my list, but I am right there with you, and I will gladly claim the label of intactivist.
That's wonderful. I so appreciate you doing the show. I think it's just great. Everybody needs to hear this. Circumcision affects everybody, whether you have a penis of your own or not, whether you're the parent of it affects everybody because it's such a pervasive practice in our culture. It affects us in terms of what we pay for medical care. It affects us in how we deal with each other, how we deal with people of our lovers and our friends. So I really Really applaud you for dealing with this issue on your program. I just want to tell people again, we're on Facebook as Intact America. There's a Facebook group called Intact America. That's not us. We're a Facebook page. And you'll know the difference. We have about 50,000 followers. And then there's our website, intactamerica.org. And also, your listeners can reach me on my email address, or actually comes to me, info@intactamerica.org. And we definitely answer people's personal questions about themselves or about their babies. We try to get them the resources they need if they have questions. One of the biggest questions we get is about forcible foreskin retraction. People's doctors tell them they have to retract their son's foreskin. Never, never, never. There's only one answer to that. No, you do not need to retract your son's normal foreskin. It'll retract on its own in time. So we get a lot of questions about that. And, people should feel free to contact us, info@intactamerica.org, about anything they want to know.
Excellent. And I'll have that information on the show notes of this episode
Fantastic.
67. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us and helping educate both ourselves and our audience. That was a lot of really great information.
It's been my pleasure. And good luck to all of you in everything that you do. You're doing great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Georgianne Chapin, Executive Director of Intact America. That was a lot of really great information.
Yes.
And if you're still here and you hung through the graphic part of that, thanks for sticking around, because, that was the history was very interesting. But, in light of our own experience, we're going to have this seemingly difficult, although it shouldn't be, conversation with our kids at some point when they're older, of course. But if they choose to have kids, I want them armed with information, and I want them to make their own choices, not just because that's what we do and because the doctor says it doesn't hurt. So again, Georgianne, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right, if you've made it this far, you're at the 2 hour and 36-minute mark, and I owe you a drink because that's a lot to sit through. But I hope you enjoyed a look back at some of our interviews over the past year, again, as selected by our listeners. And if you did take the time to listen to all of those, or maybe just the ones that you missed the first time around, thank you for listening, and I appreciate that. We want to thank our fantastic patrons over at patreon.com/SarahTalk. They are part-time patron Russell, the Wayward Willis Podcast, Josie, Heather, Harry, Jeremy, Stacy, Megan, Morgan, and we'd like to welcome our newest patron, AJ. Thank you all so much for supporting us in what we do. We appreciate you all so much, and we look forward to bringing you some really great things in 2018. Now, Becca and I are going to go do shots of some kind of NyQuil nighttime knock you out so you can sleep and forget about 2017 medicine, and hope like fuck that 2018 is a lot better. Again, thank you all for listening. We love you all so much, and we'll see you next year. This is SarahTalk.
SarahTalk is made possible by listener support. Visit patreon.com/SarahTalk to become a patron and help keep this program going. Contact Sarah and Company by email at producer@sarahtalk.com or call 224-40-SARAH. That's 224-407-2724. And follow us on social media, facebook.com/SarahTalkRadio, and on Twitter @SarahTalkRadio. SarahTalk is a production of Sarah Austin Media.